Chapter 945. But it's the divine kingdom of Buddha on the cliff. The herdsman by the lake said in a trembling voice. The hope and curiosity in their eyes were replaced by awe and uneasiness. But some emotions could never be erased once they appeared. I came from the ground, and so did the two of them. If the ground is the divine kingdom of Buddha, then you can regard us as the messengers of Buddha. Jun Mo looked at the herdsman and said calmly. He began to tell the story in the Buddhist scriptures. It was a perfect nirvana without snowstorms or bullying by nobles. In that world, there were heavenly maids scattering flowers, countless colored glazes, and spring all year round. It was the most beautiful place in humans' imagination. Sang Sang looked at that place and suddenly said, "The people from the academy are really crazy." Ning Kai found that even a gentleman like second brother would lie. He sighed and said, "Only the truly merciful people would make such a sacrifice." Sang Sang said, "Jun Mo should learn from you when it comes to deceiving people." He said helplessly, "Can there be a day when you won't say bad things about me?" Sang Sang's answer was concise. It was not that she couldn't, but she said, "Why?" Jun Mo's voice kept echoing by the lake like the warmest spring breeze. The herdsmen were fascinated and had long forgotten their previous fear and uneasiness. After the preaching, the herdsmen all knelt and bowed to Ning Kai and then dispersed. Jun Mo walked to Ning Kai and patted him on the shoulder. Then he looked at Sang Sang and asked, "Are you looking for a way back?" Not everyone could be so natural in front of Haotian. The abbey dean couldn't do it, the chief monk of scripture couldn't do it, the drunkard and the butcher couldn't do it, and even eldest brother couldn't do it. Jun Mo could do it because he had never been afraid of death. He only respected the headmaster, the youngest uncle, and the eldest brother. So he was naturally fearless and regarded Haotian as ordinary. And many years ago, on the nameless mountain in the north of Chang'an, he decided to treat Sang Sang as a little girl who deserved to be pitied when he saw her kneeling by the cliff and holding the ashes in her hands. Sang Sang had a similar feeling after leaving the divine halls of West Hill, especially after entering the Tang territory. But this was the first time she saw someone treat her like an ordinary person except for Ning Quebec. She frowned slightly, not knowing if she should be angry or calm. Jun Mo ignored what she was thinking and continued, "What's wrong with staying in the human world? Teacher said that you would be very pitiful, and now it seems that it is indeed so." Sang Sang was really angry. She had felt Ning Kai's pity in the West Hill Divine Palace and Mo Shanshan's pity by the Ink Lake in the Great River Kingdom. At this time, she heard from Jun Mo that the headmaster also felt sorry for her, and she could not help but be angry. Why would Haotian need the pity of mortals? All humans, including the headmaster of the academy, have been defeated by me. What right do you have to pity me? She reached out to Jun Mo. Jun Mo raised his eyebrows and tightened his grip on the iron sword. This iron sword could shatter the Buddha statue in Lank, sweep away thousands of soldiers in front of the verdant canyon, make Yi Su confused, and make Lu Bai retreat, but it could not stop this hand. Sang Sang's hand fell on Jun Mo's face. Since she had made her move, she didn't do anything else. She looked at Jun Mo quietly, and the atmosphere by the lake became a little strange. Ning Kai had never understood why she would accompany him to find second brother instead of looking for Buddha. Looking at this scene, he realized that there was indeed something hidden in it. Sang Sang's hand began to move on Jun Mo's face, sliding over his eyebrows, his nose, and his lips. Ning Kai was stunned and thought, "What are you doing? This is your eldest uncle." As her husband, when he saw her touching Jun Mo's face, jealousy welled up in his heart and he was very angry. Jun Mo's monk robe rose with the wind, and so did his anger. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely tense, and the situation was on the verge of exploding. At this time, Ning Kai suddenly fell forward and hugged Jun Mo's thigh, begging, "Senior brother, please bear with it a little longer. You can't beat her. A tragic drama between heaven and man was about to be staged, but it was suddenly disrupted by this uninvited guest. Jun Mo's eyebrows slightly trembled, and he wanted to kick him away. Sang Sang's hand finally left Jun Mo's face. She turned around and walked to a very small tent by the lake. She slightly frowned and thought, it's not him either. Where is Buddha hiding? Why can't I find him? She knew that the tent was Jun Mo's residence. She walked to the tent, unceremoniously lifted the curtain, and was about to walk in. But before she entered, she thought of one thing. She looked back at Jun Mo and said, I grant you immortality. Jun Mo said without thinking, we'll talk about it when you are truly immortal. Since Sang Sang came to the human world, she had granted immortality to many people. They all had different reactions. The drunkard and the butcher were overjoyed. Tang Xiaotang thought it was too sudden and suggested that she buy the food for the evening first. Mrs. Zheng just hugged her and cried, and didn't understand what she said. Ning Ke simply chose to refuse. Most of the time, she didn't hear what she wanted. But today, Jun Mo gave her a very unexpected answer, which made her feel very puzzled. It's up to you. She stood outside the tent and thought for a while. Then she said and walked in. Looking at the tent, Ning Ke felt very helpless and said, you really sold immortality like cabbages, and it was a big sale. But the method was so rough that no one would buy it no matter how cheap it was. Jun Mo asked, what is she doing? Ning Ke said, senior brother, you used to treat her very well, so she wants to return the favor. Jun Mo was a very smart person. He only needed to hear this sentence to understand what Hao Tian meant. He said, she actually wants to use this method to cut off her relationship with the human world. What an idiot. Ning Ke sighed and said, I also think she is an idiot. Jun Mo said, it seems that she hasn't found a way to return to the divine kingdom. That's why she is so mischievous. What about you? Have you found a way to let her stay in the human world? Ning Ke remembered the sentence that he thought of before Chang'an and said, not yet. I wanted to come to Xiankong Temple to see if I could get any inspiration. But now it seems that it is meaningless. There could be a perfect method in the world that would not betray Chang'an and not betray the human world. This method must be far more profound than the Buddhist Dharma. Jun Mo said, I have been watching the moon these days. The headmaster seems to be struggling. If she goes back, the human world will definitely be defeated. So younger brother, you have to work harder. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, if that day really comes, we have to use the last method. Jun Mo said, I don't want to go against human relations. Ning Ke said, senior brother is a gentleman, but I am not. Jun Mo looked at the iron sword in his hand and said after thinking, I still don't think it is right. Ning Ke didn't want to continue this topic and said, senior brother, you have been in Xiankong Temple for some time. What new things have you encountered? Jun Mo raised the iron sword in his hand and pointed to the majestic mountain in the distance. He said, in such a dirty place, what else can there be except dirty people and things? Ning Ke thought that his question was indeed a bit stupid. With second brother's temperament, he would not be interested in visiting the ancient times. He said, senior brother, it is fun to preach and kill people in the wilderness. Jun Mo shook his head and said, you came at the right time. I just started killing people today. I have been telling stories from the Buddhist scriptures to the herdsmen and serfs for the past few days. Ning Ke found it a bit hard to understand. He thought that senior brother hated the Buddhism sect and monks the most. Even if he had never read the Buddhist scriptures, how could he preach to the devout believers of the Buddhism sect? Jun Mo said, I read some Buddhist scriptures in the back of the mountain and some more on the journey. These herdsmen can't even read the words. It is more effective to preach some simple stories. Ning Ke praised, senior brother, you are so kind. You must have some enlightenment when you preach. Jun Mo said indifferently, in my opinion, the Buddhist scriptures are all lies. What enlightenment can there be? Ning Ke was puzzled. The people here have lived underground for generations and worshipped the Xiankong temple with their flesh and blood. However, they have never heard of Buddhism. So when I preached, they were wild with joy and regarded me as a real guru. Jun Mo looked at the gradually cold and gloomy wilderness and his voice gradually became cold. He said, the Buddhism sect claims to deliver all living beings from suffering, but treats them as pigs and dogs. The Buddhism sect claims that there are endless mysteries in the Buddhist scriptures, but they don't even let their believers read them. Then what is the difference between the Buddhist scriptures and waste paper? What is the difference between them and liars? Ning Ke asked, Senior brother, what are you going to do next? Jun Mo said, I came here to meditate and cultivate Buddhism. Who would have thought that the Buddha is so hateful? How can I meditate after seeing the 3,000 miserable worlds? These bald donkeys all deserve to die. Ning Ke reminded him, Seventh sister said that we can't use bald donkeys to scold people. Jun Mo stroked his new dark hair and said, since there is new hair, we can scold them. Ning Ke praised, that makes sense. Jun Mo looked at the crescent moon in the night sky and said, the headmaster is fighting with Haotian. As his disciple, I should serve him. But my cultivation is too low and I can't ascend to heaven or defeat her. So I can only do what the academy should do in the human world. Let's get rid of the Xiankong temple first. Ning Ke praised again, Senior brother is really merciful. Jun Mo turned to look at him and said, since I started killing people today, I will kill people every day. I will kill more and more people. I can only ignore your matter for the time being. In the previous battle by the lake, the nobleman left after cutting off his ear, arm and face. Ning Ke knew that it was his senior brother's arrangement. Otherwise, the nobleman would definitely die. His purpose was naturally to kill more people tomorrow. Killing those noblemen will definitely attract the monk soldiers. Killing the monk soldiers will attract the guru and living Buddha. Senior brother's sword shakes the world, and eventually the Xiankong temple will be alerted. I am afraid that we can't kill them all. Ning Ke was a little worried. I told those herdsmen that no matter how high the cliff is, as long as you are willing to climb it, you will climb to the top one day. The same goes for killing people. As long as you keep killing, there will be a day when you can kill them all. Jun Mo gazed at the majestic peak in the darkness of the night and said, look at the pitch-black mountain over there. I'll kill all the dogs underground first, then I'll rush over and kill all the bald donkeys in the temple. Then I'll burn down the mountain. Ning Ke praised again, cultivating Buddhism means killing Buddha. Senior brother, you are so merciful. Jun Mo said, wrong. Killing Buddha is cultivating Buddhism. Ning Ke said, maybe this is the real merciful Buddhism. Jun Mo said, yes. Even if Buddha was reborn and stood in front of me, I would still say the same thing. Ning Ke was silent for a moment and said, maybe Buddha is still alive. Don't be naughty. He said, of course, even if Buddha is still alive, I will kill him with a sword. Killing Buddha when encountering Buddha, this was the Buddha that Jun Mo cultivated. Tears welled up in my eyes. I can't believe I wrote 5 chapters. Thank you for not believing me. Finally, I sincerely ask you to vote for me. The book review section needs this very much. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 946. Ning Ke asked, what if I can't kill him? Jun Mo said, then I'll die. He said it calmly, but Ning Ke was shocked. After a long silence, he said again, Senior brother, Buddha might still be alive. Jun Mo didn't believe it at all. He scolded seriously, "You fool. Buddha has already reached nirvana. If he is still alive, how could Headmaster and Haotian not know?" Ning Ke sighed and said, "She really doesn't know whether Buddha is alive or not. Otherwise, why would she come to Xiankong Temple?" After a moment of silence, Jun Mo said, "Then let's find him first." When they returned to the small tent by the lake, Sang Sang was sleeping. It turned out that Haotian felt sleepy. Hearing footsteps, she opened her eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. She said, "I'll spare his life and cut off this mortal bond." Jun Mo said, "Before the verdant canyon, I said that I don't need heaven to spare my life." Ning Ke said earnestly, "You can't cut off your mortal bond just because you want to. Can you be reasonable?" Sang Sang sat up and looked at Jun Mo. She said, "I don't understand. If Buddha wants to kill me, it should be what the Academy wants to see the most. Why are you on my side?" She was Haotian, so she could know Jun Mo's preference from his expression. She didn't mention Ning Ke's position because she was used to Ning Ke's following. Jun Mo said calmly, "Shameless." Shameless meant being on the same side as him. Ning Ke's answer was more direct. He said, "The Academy can't afford to lose that person." After leaving the lake and meadow in front of the cliff, Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked around in the field underground, trying to find traces of Buddha being alive or dead. Sometimes when they were grilling fish by the lake, he would wonder what second brother was doing now. Was he killing nobles and soldier monks with the iron sword, or was he arguing with those unreasonable living Buddhas? In the next few decades, Jun Mo would hold the iron sword and keep fighting in this miserable world. The Buddhist land, which had been silent for countless years, would be stirred up. The Xiankong Temple, which enslaved millions of serfs, would probably start to tremble because of fear. Thinking of those images, even someone as cold-blooded as him felt a little emotional. He wished he could join hands with his senior brother. But now he had more important things to do. Even if he finished the deal with Buddha and Haotian, he still had to return to Chang and to do the big sale in the human world. The journey to find the Buddha continued. Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked through the vast field at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, but still found no clues. The two became more and more silent. The unknown was unsettling, especially for those who were omniscient. She walked through the wilderness, returned, and climbed the mountain again. She walked back and forth between the numerous temples between the forest cliffs. She meditated in front of the solemn Buddha statues and stood at the edge of the cliff, staring at the sky in a daze. On the west peak, in the main hall of the commandment yard, they stood among the towering old trees, listening to the sound of the board falling heavily on the monks. On the east peak, they stood in the shadow of the cliff rocks, watching the warrior monks stomping on the ground. In the Mahavira hall at the top of the peak, they saw Qi Nian who was meditating. In the hut behind the hall, they saw a thin old monk who was cooking porridge, and then they saw an ancient bell. The Xiankong temple between the peaks looked so solemn and peaceful, totally different from the world below the peak. Looking at these images, Ning Ke was very puzzled. The Buddhism sect claimed to be merciful. How could they meditate on the peak while the common people suffered under the peak? How could they meditate while sitting on the peak and thinking about the people under the peak? In the yellow temple on the cliff platform below the peak, Ning Ke saw an acquaintance. It was Master Huang Yang, who left Chang'an and returned to the Xiankong temple to ask Buddha again. At that time, Sang Sang was elsewhere, so Huang Yang only saw him. Master Huang Yang was a little surprised. Ning Ke briefly told him what had happened these days, and then the master realized that so many things had happened in the world. He said, "You'd better leave as soon as possible." Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, "What's wrong with the Xiankong temple?" Master Huang Yang shook his head and said, "I don't know what's wrong, so there should be something." Master Huang Yang was the younger brother of the emperor of the Tang Empire, and his status in the secular world was extremely noble, so he was naturally treated with courtesy in the Xiankong temple. However, these days, the Xiankong temple was still worshipping him, but no monk came to visit him. It gave people a feeling that the Xiankong temple was deliberately isolating him, which made him a little vigilant. The moment he saw Ning Kai, the master knew where the trouble came from. In the wilderness, Sangsang stomped the chief preaching monk into the solid ground, but the chief preaching monk did not die. It was not surprising that the Xiankong temple knew the news of her and Ning Kai's arrival. Ning Kai was not worried. As the saying goes, with Haotian in one's arms, no one could defeat him. Master Huangyang knew what he was thinking, but he had a different idea. He untied the string of prayer beads on his wrist and handed it to him. With a solemn expression, he said, "Buddha is merciful, but there are times when thunder strikes." Hearing the words, "Buddha is merciful," in the Xiankong temple, Ning Kai subconsciously felt a little uncomfortable. He walked to the stone steps in front of the temple, pointed to the world under the peak covered by clouds, and said, "Is there mercy there?" Master Huangyang knew that he had been walking in the world under the peak for a long time. He said, "Many years ago, the Buddha established the Buddha kingdom with great wishes and built countless yellow temples among the peaks. He also gathered countless sinful people to farm and graze here to support the monks. He hoped that the monks could be enlightened by the Dharma and wash away their sins." Ning Kai said, "It's all bullshit. Let's not talk about whether the mortals who were captured by the Buddha were really sinful. Even if they were, they had their own laws to deal with them. I'm just a cultivator. How could I be qualified to convict them? Even if those people were really sinful, or even 10 generations of evildoers, what sins did their descendants have? Why do we have to live in this godforsaken place for generations?" Master Huangyang had Buddha in his heart, so he couldn't agree with Ning Kai's accusation. But he also knew that there was no way to refute it. After a long silence, he said, "This life is the most bitter, but the next life may be the happiest." Ning Kai turned around on the stone steps and looked at the Buddha statue in the temple. He said, "No matter how happy the next life is, how can it be equal to countless generations of suffering? The Buddha you worship is really disgusting." Master Huangyang said, "Maybe it's wrong, but who dares to disobey the rules set by the Buddha?" Ning Kai said, "To cultivate the Buddha, you need to meditate. The monks sit among the peaks and enjoy the offerings of those slaves. Can you really meditate? Can you really meditate?" Master Huangyang said, "Most of the monks in the temple have never been to the foot of the peak in their lives." Ning Kai said, "But they are not fools. They know very well what the world under the peak is like. Besides, the Xiankong temple is also going to enter the human world. Those monk soldiers who go to the human world, or powerhouses like you and Qin Yan, have to pass through the field to get out of the giant sinkhole. How can you ignore those poor people?" Master Huangyang said, "What you said makes sense. The Xiankong temple has been passed down for countless years. Naturally, there are really merciful eminent monks. Even if they violate the commandments of the Buddha, they want to make changes. But they all fail. What makes those eminent monks most confused is that when they try to make changes, the people under the peak become at a loss, as if suffering has become the dependence of their lives." Ning Kai said, "Faith is an addiction. If you want to get rid of it, it's inevitable that you will feel pain at the beginning. But how can you just let it go just because of temporary pain?" Master Huangyang said, "But if the Buddha land starts to collapse, how can you do anything?" Ning Kai said, "Why should we care about this damn place if it collapses?" Master Huangyang shook his head helplessly. He thought that Ning Kai, as a person outside the world, was right to think so. But how could the monks in the temple, as the disciples of the Buddha, watch the Buddha land being destroyed? Ning Kai said again, "If those eminent monks are really merciful, how can they bear it?" Master Huangyang said, "They can't bear it, but they can't do anything about it. So they can only leave." Ning Kai said, so you left the Xiankong temple and returned to Chang'an. Master Huang Yang said, yes, there are many monks like me who left the Xiankong temple. When Master Qishan was young, he read all the Buddhist scriptures and understood all the Dharma. He was regarded as the only successor by the chief monk of the Xiankong temple at that time. However, he couldn't bear to see the suffering of the people under the peak, so he finally broke the mountain gate and went to the Lank temple. Ning Ke looked at the golden Buddha statue in the temple and thought of Master Qishan, who was sick from overwork in the cave on Hua Mountain. He was silent for a long time and said, "The heart of Buddha can't bear it." Ning Ke returned to the remote cliff yard, pulled out the green vines and came to the tree in front of Lian Sheng's old residence. He didn't know what kind of tree it was. He only remembered that when he came here a few days ago, there was only one white flower on the whole tree. The wind blew it to his shoulder and now it was inserted in Sangsang's hair. Only a few days later, the tree was full of small white flowers. They spread their petals among the not dense green leaves, exuding a very pleasant floral fragrance and gradually drifting away with the breeze. Sangsang walked to him. As she said a few days ago, no matter where Ning Ke was, she could easily find him. He would never let her get lost. The breeze blew between the cliffs. The green leaves and small white flowers trembled slightly. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the green leaves gradually thickened and the small white flowers gradually withered. The scene was extremely magical. Only the small white flower in Sangsang's hair was still delicate and fresh. The green leaves thickened and the white flowers withered, but it didn't mean that it was desolate. It could also be a bumper harvest, because only when the flowers fell would they bear fruit. It didn't take long before the tree was full of green pears. Ning Ke didn't know that the tree by the cliff was actually a pear tree until then. He reached out to pick a green pear from the branch and found that it was much smaller than the common pears in the world. The surface of the pear was very light, tender and juicy. Ning Ke had seen this kind of green pear before, and so had Sangsang. It was in the cave behind the Buddha statue on Hua Mountain several years ago. Master Qishan took out a green pear for Sangsang to eat, and then Sangsang gave him half. The green pear was really delicious. Looking at the green pear in his hand, Ning Ke was a little hesitant and even vigilant. Last time, he and Sangsang fell asleep after eating this green pear and were sucked into Buddha's chessboard. It would have been fine if it was any other time, but now he and Sangsang were in Xiankong temple. Ning Ke had been wondering why the monks in Xiankong temple were always so calm. Even if they couldn't find Sangsang in him, they should be a little nervous. However, countless temples between the peaks were still as usual. Some were chanting, some were meditating, the commandment hall was still punishing the monks, and the warrior monks kept stamping the ground. The morning bell and evening drum were still refreshing. Xiankong temple was too peaceful now. What were the monks in Xiankong temple waiting for? Were they waiting for the Dharma that the Buddhism sect emphasized? Were they waiting for the moment when the Dharma came? Where was that moment? Was it on this green pear? Ning Ke looked at the small green pear in his hand and frowned slightly. At this moment, a very melodious bell suddenly came from the peak. Could it clear the mind? Ning Ke didn't think so. When he heard the bell, his heart suddenly tightened, as if it was held by an invisible hand and would be crushed in the next moment. The bell could not clear the mind, but it could only shock the mind. Ning Ke's face instantly turned pale, and he almost crushed the small green pear in his hand in pain. Then, he spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. He didn't know when her hand, which passed through the breeze between the cliffs, had grasped his hand. It was Sangsang's hand. A pure and powerful divinity came from her hand and instantly occupied Ning Ke's body and mind. It repaired his broken heart at an unimaginable speed. Ning Ke got rid of the desperate situation and looked at the peak where the bell came from. His clothes were stained with blood, and his face was also stained with blood. There was still lingering fear in his eyes. The melodious bell came from the Grand Buddha's hall of Xiankong Temple, from the ancient bell that he and Sang Sang had seen before. However, he had never thought that the bell would be so terrifying. As his cultivation of the Great Spirit deepened, his body became as strong as steel. Ordinary knives and arrows couldn't even break his skin, let alone his heart, which was wrapped in layers of Great Spirit. However, a bell from Xiankong Temple had shattered his heart and almost killed him. Feeling the warmth in his hand, Ning Ke once again felt the so-called, with Sang Sang in my hand, I have the world. No matter how terrifying the bell was, no matter how powerful Xiankong Temple was, as long as he held Sang Sang's hand tightly, he could still live even if she cut him into pieces. This was the conclusion that Ning Ke had come to after countless blood and tears in the Divine Hall of Light and the Yu prison. He was very confident. Holding Sang Sang's hand, he was no longer afraid and could listen to the bell carefully. The sound of the bell reverberated among the cliffs and countless temples. It was so distant. Gradually, the chanting of sutras began to merge with the sound of the bell. In countless temples, countless monks were chanting Buddhist scriptures. The chanting was mixed together and buzzing. It was impossible to tell which Buddhist scripture they were chanting. Every Buddhist temple in the world started the day with the bell, which was the morning bell. When the morning bell rang, the monks woke up and began to chant devoutly. It was the morning class. When the Xiankong Temple woke up, the real Buddhist land left by Buddha in the human world also began to show its true appearance. A light of Buddha appeared on the cliff plateau and covered Sang Sang. Ning Ke looked at this scene and felt cold all over. His heart seemed to stop beating. Because he remembered a scene in the back hall of Lank Temple many years ago. This chapter is 4,000 words. There are more chapters today, but I'm a little tired and will write slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 947. Many years ago, in the autumn, a ray of Buddha's light penetrated the temple and fell on Sang Sang. That ray of Buddha's light was so merciful and so cold. In the Buddha's light, Sang Sang's face became paler and her thin body became smaller. She looked at Ning Ke outside the Buddha's light and cried silently. From that moment on, she became the daughter of Yama and suffered endless pain and fear. Then she and Ning Ke began to be hunted by the whole human world. That ray of Buddha's light was undoubtedly the most fundamental turning point in Ning Ke and Sang Sang's lives. Everything that happened after that actually began from that. How could Ning Ke not remember it? At this time, looking at the Buddha's light on the cliff plateau and Sang Sang in the Buddha's light, he seemed to return to those years. The most painful and cold emotions all poured into his mind. No! He cried painfully. The Buddha's light appeared so suddenly that it connected the cliff plateau with the sky. Even Sang Sang couldn't tell whether it came from the sky or from the bottom of the cliff plateau. To be more precise, the Buddha's light connected the cliff plateau with the clouds. Countless layers of clouds floated over the mountain peak and completely covered the real blue sky. Sang Sang looked up at the depths of the Buddha's light with her hands behind her back. She looked calm. Her face was extremely pale, and now it was as white as snow under the bright light. Since she had to put her hands behind her back, she naturally didn't continue to hold Ning Ke's hand. Because even she couldn't be too distracted in the face of the Buddha's light. However, at this moment, she heard Ning Ke's painful cry behind her. Even the Buddha's light didn't make her frown, but Ning Ke's voice made her frown slightly. She turned to look at Ning Ke and asked, "Don't what?" Ning Ke was affected by the Buddha's light and was vomiting blood in pain. Because he was worried about her safety, his face became extremely pale. He didn't expect that things would develop completely differently from what he had imagined. He looked at Sang Sang in the Buddha's light and didn't know what to say. Sang Sang didn't cry, vomit blood, fear, or call his name. Sang Sang was not as thin and pitiful as she used to be. Her figure was so tall that even the Buddha's light couldn't overshadow her. Only then did he remember that Sang Sang had grown up. She was now the omnipotent and omniscient Haotian. She was no longer the little handmaiden who could not leave him. She no longer needed his protection. On the contrary, she began to protect him. "It's nothing," Ning Kei said with a smile. Then, he realized that he really didn't know what to say, so he vomited another mouthful of blood. Sang Sang was a little annoyed, thinking that humans were really troublesome creatures. One moment he was frightened, the next moment he was smiling. She actually couldn't figure out what was going on in his mind. Looking at the blood overflowing from the corner of Ning Kei's mouth, she thought she understood what he meant. With Ning Kei's state, without her holding his hand, he was naturally in great pain under the coercion of the Buddha's light. He said no, which meant he didn't want her to let go of his hand. As for what he said after that, it was naturally the boring pride of a male animal. "I'm busy." Sang Sang asked him, "Don't you know how to hold an umbrella?" In the past, it was she who vomited blood, but now it was his turn. Ning Kei was immersed in the sentimental mood brought by this change. Hearing this, he came to himself and hurriedly took out the big black umbrella and opened it. Since that autumn in Leng Temple, the big black umbrella had been tortured over these years and had long been tattered. Ning Kei took an old cloth from the jade tree and mended it, but it still looked extremely ugly. It was like a beggar's clothes with countless patches. Because it hadn't been washed for many years, it was full of black mud and didn't have the beautiful feeling of a blooming black lotus. Ning Kei didn't care. When he found that the black umbrella could really block the Buddha's light, he was very happy. He followed Sang Sang's gaze and looked into the depths of the Buddha's light, trying to find out where the enemy was. He was in a good mood, so was Sang Sang. Xiankong Temple finally responded. Instead of being afraid, she was very expectant. As long as there was a change, it would be good. The clue of Buddha's whereabouts might be in it. However, the next change was somewhat beyond their expectations. The sound of sutra echoing between the cliffs gradually became orderly. The loud and distant bell didn't cover the sound of sutra. It was more like the wind in a bellows, helping the sound of sutra to become louder and louder. With the change of the bell and the sound of sutra, the Buddha's light on the cliff yard also changed. The light became clearer and quieter, and the Buddha's power contained in it became more and more terrifying. Sang Sang still stood in the Buddha's light with her hands behind her back, looking calm and composed. Ning Kei's hand holding the handle of the umbrella trembled slightly. It became more and more difficult. He hurriedly stuffed the green pear into his sleeve and held the umbrella handle with both hands to barely support himself. At the peak, behind the grand hall of Xiankong Temple, there was no monk beside the ancient bell, but it swayed in the wind. The bell resounded through the entire giant peak and the field under the peak until it reached the cliff far away and then was knocked back. It kept repeating, making people intoxicated. On the stone steps in front of the grand hall, dozens of monks sat cross-legged. They put their palms together and closed their eyes to meditate. They kept chanting along with the rhythm of the bell, as if they were singing. Qi Nian sat at the forefront. He was a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect who had been practicing silent meditation for many years. Today, he read countless times more words than he had said in the past 10 years. The sound of sutra contained infinite power. The other dozens of monks were extremely old. Their white eyebrows seemed to hang down to their chests, and their palms put together were more wrinkled than the oldest tree's bark. It was obvious that they were elders in the Xiankong Temple. There were also people chanting in the grand hall. Master Chi Mei, who was seriously injured by eldest brother in front of the Pamir Mountains, knelt in the most pious posture in front of the Buddha statue and kept chanting. The back of his head was seriously deformed, so the sutra he chanted was a little vague. However, when he walked out of the hall, it became extremely clear. In several yellow temples in the East Peak and West Peak, hundreds of monks in red cassocks sat cross-legged on the cliff platform. They put their palms together and looked determined. They kept chanting. In dozens of temples in the mist on the mountainside, thousands of monks in grey cassocks sat cross-legged in the meditation room. They put their palms together and looked nervous. They kept chanting. In hundreds of dark temples at the foot of the mountain, countless monks in colorful cassocks sat cross-legged in front of the Buddha statue. They put their palms together and looked confused. They kept chanting. In the vast field at the bottom of the giant pit, millions of people knelt in the direction of the Xiankong temple. No matter they were dressed shabbily or wore gold and silver, they looked very pious and kept praying. Different positions in the Buddhist country would result in different clothes and different expressions. The strong practitioners of the Buddhist sect didn't need to sit in front of the Buddha statue, while the ordinary monks needed to rely on the Buddha to boost their courage. The strong ones looked calm, the strong ones looked determined, the weak ones looked nervous, and the confused monks didn't even know what was happening. The pious believers in the field also didn't know what was going on. However, their faith was the strongest. They didn't learn the sutra, but the effect of praying was the strongest. But no matter what kind of people they were chanting and praying. Bells, sutra sounds, and prayers were everywhere in the Buddha kingdom. The clouds were calm, and many traces gradually appeared. That was the shadow of the sutra in the clouds. The real sutra was in the air. Thousands of temple-sized characters glowed with a faint golden light. They floated over the heads of the herdsmen, the real temples, and the green trees on the cliffs. They kept arranging and combining in the sky. The dark field was brightly illuminated by these golden sutra. The believers kneeling in the field looked very excited. They became more pious and their hearts to Buddha became firmer. Their prayers became more and more orderly and loud. Jun Mo, who stood quietly by a blue lake near the cliff, looked very special compared with the herdsman kneeling on the ground. His figure looked so lonely and powerful. He looked at the golden sutra flying toward the giant peak and slightly raised his eyebrows. Thousands of golden sutra gathered from all directions and slowly rotated around the giant peak. They illuminated the green trees and the temples, and the light of Buddha on the cliff yard became brighter. In the light of Buddha, Ning Ke held the handle of the umbrella tightly with his pale face. Sang Sang looked at the depths of the light of Buddha, and her face became paler and paler. But she still didn't make a move, because she wanted to see where the light of Buddha came from and where Buddha was. Ning Ke looked at her back and felt a little nervous. Although he didn't know the method of Xiankong temple chanting, nor did he know what the golden words in the sky meant, his talent in talisman Taoism was unparalleled. Intuitively, he guessed that if those golden words finally arranged into a Buddhist sutra, it would be difficult for Sang Sang to deal with the real attack of the Buddhism sect. So why didn't she make a move? Sang Sang looked up at the depths of the light of Buddha for a long time. Suddenly, she looked at the cliff yard under her feet and said, "I see, the mountain where Xiankong Temple was located was the tallest and largest mountain in the world. However, this mountain was always hidden in the giant sinkhole. From the surface, it was just an inconspicuous small mound. Its meaning was naturally consistent with Buddhism and Taoism. Because this mountain was the tallest person in the world, but he didn't want to show up. This cliff yard was not a real cliff yard, but a palm open to the sky. The pear tree on the edge of the cliff was not a real tree, but a flower between the fingers of that person. That person was Buddha. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood on the cliff yard, standing beside the pear tree. In fact, they were standing in the palm of Buddha, standing under the little white flower between his fingers. Sang Sang picked the little white flower on her temples and threw it into the wind. She looked at the top of the mountain and said sarcastically, "This mountain is just your corpse, not you." Do you want to trap me in your palm like this? Yes, this mountain was not the Gautama Buddha, but the remains of the Gautama Buddha after his nirvanic rebirth. However, it was the remains of Buddha, the highest in the world. Who could escape from the palm of Buddha? Well, there is one more chapter. It will be published later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 948. The mountain was the Buddha, and the cliff plateau was the Buddha's palm. The light of Buddha, which was full of silent power, did not come from the sky, but from the Buddha's palm, from the pious faith of countless monks and believers in Xiankong Temple and the plain at the bottom of the pit. It was the same for the scriptures that lingered between the peaks. They were written by Buddha himself countless years ago and sung by his disciples and believers devoutly after countless years. The Buddha's nature gilded the scriptures, and naturally, the Dharma of Buddha was boundless. Sang quietly looked at the cliff plateau, the scriptures floating in the air, and the light of Buddha. She saw the Lank Temple in autumn a few years ago. That year, the Lank Temple also had such a silent light of Buddha. It came from the Buddha statue on the top of Tile Mountain and started from the crisp bell in the hands of Bao Shu, the president of Commandment Yard. This year, the light of Buddha in Xiankong Temple was still cold. It came from the cliff plateau, from the palm of Buddha's slough, and from the distant bell behind the treasure hall on the top of the peak. That year, the light of Buddha in Lank Temple was to kill the daughter of Yama. This year, the light of Buddha in Xiankong Temple was to suppress Haotian. Haotian was the daughter of Yama, and the light of Buddha was still the same. Everything was clear now. For the headmaster of academy, Haotian set up a trap for 1,000 years. Before that, Buddha had read the Piming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and written notes. He knew what would happen in the future and predicted that a bright moon would appear when the night came. However, he did not say that Haotian would come to the human world and become weaker and weaker. Therefore, Buddha also set up a trap. He left many celestial devices in the human world, such as the Yulan bell, the chessboard, and the light of Buddha to suppress the entrance to the underworld. However, how could Buddha not know that the underworld did not exist? From the beginning to the end, Buddha wanted to kill her. Buddha wanted to destroy Haotian. The Yulan bell was crushed into scrap iron by Jun Mo, and the Buddha statue on the top of Tile Mountain was chopped into pieces by Jun Mo. The chessboard was taken to the wilderness by Ning Ke and Sang. However, the mountain transformed from the remains of Buddha was much taller than the stone statues on Hua Mountain. The bell of Xiankong Temple was much louder than the Yulan bell, and the light of Buddha was also much stronger. Sang saw through everything. She and Ning Ke were telepathic, so Ning Ke naturally knew all the causes and effects. Only then did he know that the mountain where Xiankong Temple was located was actually the body of Buddha. He was shocked. No one could not be shocked at this moment. His face was pale, not only because he was too shocked, but also because the golden characters flying around the mountain peak had gradually found their order and were about to form a complete scripture. Each character was as big as a temple, and thousands of characters were a huge scripture. The golden scripture floated in the sky above Xiankong Temple and even covered the clouds. With a clang, Ning Ke held the hilt of the cutlass. The iron cutlass was half out of the sheath, and the cold light was threatening. Just as he was about to attack, Sang waved her sleeves. His green robe, which was covered in flowers, sparkled in the endless Buddhist light, like the most noble imperial robe. She was the king of this world. She waved her sleeves to the sky, and a gust of wind roared like a dragon, passing through the dense forests and temples between the peaks, and chopping down countless monks off the cliff. The wind came to the Mahavira Hall at the top of the peak. The ancient bell shook slightly, and the bell sounds were slightly chaotic. Grass was flying on the stone steps. Qi Nian and the other old monks closed their eyes and were not afraid of being blinded. However, their Zen hearts were gradually becoming restless and confused, and blood seeped out of their mouths and noses. At this moment, Qi Mei, who was in front of the Buddha statue in the hall, changed from kneeling to sitting. His expression was firm and determined. He held a wooden staff and hit the wooden fish in front of him heavily. The wooden fish was instantly broken. Almost at the same time, the Vajra pestle held by the venerable beside the Buddha statue fell from the sky and hit Qi Mei's head heavily. With a puff, Qi Mei's skulls were all broken, and his brains and blood were scattered everywhere. Blood stains stained the Buddha statue. The Mahavira hall, which was shaking in the gust of wind, suddenly stabilized and became one with the peak. The monks also finally stabilized their bodies and hearts. Sang Sang waved her sleeves and created wind. It was the wind of heaven, so it would not be annihilated. It floated up from the top of the peak and instantly came to the scripture composed of thousands of words in the sky. The clouds in the sky were chaotic, and the golden words under the clouds were scattered everywhere. In the golden light, the edges of the scripture that was about to take shape were messed up, and it was difficult to understand the content. Sang Sang broke the scripture left by the Buddha by waving her sleeves, but her expression became solemn. Because she had a better understanding of the surrounding environment in the moment she waved her sleeves. She was puzzled to find that she actually could not take Ning Ke away from the cliff plateau. The power of the Prohibition Cliff Plateau was not the rule, nor was it an ordinary cultivation method. Cultivation was still within the rule. Even the small world above the 5 states was still in the world of Haotian. In that case, even if she was much weaker after coming to the human world, she could still break the 3,000 worlds with a single thought. At this time, they were trapped in a macro world. How could there be a real macro world in the world of Haotian? The Buddha turned his body into a mountain. There were countless temples on the mountain, and countless believers at the foot of the mountain. The mountain originally had no consciousness, no spirit, and no life. But for countless years, the temples on the mountain were filled with incense, the monks kept chanting, and the believers in the wilderness worshipped. Finally, the Buddha nature was cultivated. The Buddha nature was the consciousness of the monks and believers. After countless years, countless people, countless consciousnesses, and countless lives, the world finally became a Buddha land. The real Buddha land was the real world, the big world of the nirvana. This world was located in the far west of the human world, so it was called the Western Nirvana. Even if she was in the Western Nirvana and could not leave easily, Sang Sang did not care. She was Haotian, and even if she fought with millions or even more Buddhism believers, she would not lose. However, she had been in the human world for a long time, and the power of the human world that the headmaster poured into her body was constantly weakening her. If she wanted to break the Western Nirvana, she would have to pay a great price. If the Western Nirvana was destroyed, there was still Chang and City, the Academy, and the God-stunning array in the human world. Then how could she, who was extremely weak, do? So she hesitated. Ning Ke did not know why she hesitated. The current situation was very bad. The Buddhist scripture that was blown away by the wind did not disappear, and the scattered parts fell to the cliff plateau. Those golden, monastery-sized characters gradually became smaller as they floated down to the plateau. Eventually, they turned into petal-like existences that exuded a strange fragrance. In the Buddha land, there were heavenly-made scattering flowers, which was very beautiful. Ning Ke's expression was very solemn. The petals changed from the scripture fell on the surface of the big black umbrella, and each petal was as heavy as a giant stone. The light of Buddha was already very powerful. Countless petals fell on the surface of the big black umbrella, which was even more unbearable for human beings. In an instant, he felt that his arm was about to break. Ning Ke inserted the handle of the umbrella into the cliff plateau, believing that since the mountain was the body of Buddha, it must be able to withstand it. He glanced at Sang Sang, who stood in silence in the light of Buddha. He pulled out the iron cutlass and chopped at the falling petals. The cutlass left a mark, and the mark was the word, and the word was the divine talisman, the E-talisman. The petals looked like petals, but they were actually words, words from the Buddhist scripture. The Dharma was incomparable, so the words were as heavy as a mountain. If Buddha had left some other means, Ning Kei's cultivation state within the 5 states would not have been able to do anything. He could only grab Sang Sang's sleeves and hide behind her. But since it was a scripture, and the falling words were words, he could break it. Because he was the best calligrapher and the most powerful divine talisman master in the world. He had broken countless words in the old library of the academy, and he was best at breaking words in his life. 7 divine talismans of E appeared in the air by the cliff. The falling petals touched the talisman and broke into pieces, because the words in the flowers were broken into meaningless lines. The petals continued to fall. Thousands of words were thousands of flowers, like the spring rain, and it did not stop for a long time. The 7 divine talismans of E fought against the power of Buddha, but they did not last long and disappeared. Looking at the scripture that was still half broken in the air, the words that kept falling from the slightly messy scripture, and the petals that were near him, Ning Kei was not afraid at all. He waved his blade again. This time, he did not break words, but wrote a word in the sky. He wrote it very casually, and even he did not know what it was. Even if Buddha could know for 500 years after his death, he could not guess it. The strokes of the iron cutlass on the scripture were more like graffiti. No matter how simple the scripture was, as long as a naughty boy scribbled on it, even the most knowledgeable monk could not understand the meaning of it. The scripture in the Buddhist land was broken by Ning Kei's random chopping. He was a monster cultivated by the headmaster of academy and Yen Sei. He did not belong to the world of Haotian or the world of Buddha. The last place he wanted to stay was the Western Nirvana. Using words to deal with Ning Kei was like cutting fish in front of the headmaster of academy or selling hot and sour noodle slice soup in front of Lin 47th Street. He sheathed his cutlass and looked at Sang Sang, saying, "Why don't you do it?" Sang Sang did not respond to him, thinking about something. Ning Kei shook off the petals on the big black umbrella and put them on her head to block the light of Buddha for her. Sang Sang frowned slightly and said, "You can't do anything to me with these tricks." Ning Kei said, "Look at your pale face. Why do you have to be brave?" Sang Sang said, "I am strong. Why do I have to be brave?" Ning Kei thought that Haotian cared too much about his face and still had to be brave at this time. He put the handle of the umbrella into her hand, looked at the peak and shouted, "Let's give up. Can we stop fighting?" Sang Sang frowned again and was a little unhappy. Ning Kei said seriously, "Look at me. I never know what face is." Xiankong Temple knew that Haotian would not give up, so he would not either. What answered Ning Kei was the sound of bells all over the mountain and cliffs, endless solemn chanting, and a voice. "Since we are fighting with heaven, why should the academy stand on heaven's side?" This voice was quiet and majestic. If one listened carefully, it could only be described as magnificent. And what it asked was the most fundamental question, which was difficult for anyone to answer. Hearing this, Ning Kei laughed happily. "Chief monk, you should still be buried in the ground now, but you are still so energetic. It is really admirable. It was not difficult to write 5 chapters yesterday. What was difficult was that after writing 5 chapters yesterday, I wrote another 10,000 words today. I'm already full of admiration for myself. I don't have any other requests. I just hope that everyone can give me more recommendation votes." Today, the moderator, Dream Chaser, helped me calculate that this Sunday's Nightfall needs 28,000 recommendation votes. I'm still short of 10,000. Please support me. Nightfall and the book review section need your help. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 949. Ning Kei's laughter was extremely joyful and heroic. It flew out from the edge of the cliff, passed through the green pear blossoms, drifted over the Buddha's light and withered scripture petals, and echoed among countless temples. Even the chanting of millions of people and the distant bell that seemed to come from ancient times could not suppress it. Ever since he became invincible in the human world during the right to light, he had been tortured countless times by Sang Sang. When he took Sang Sang on the journey, she was always the one to take action. When she took action, he could only stand behind pitifully. How could he have a chance to take action? It seemed that he had defeated the master of calligraphy in the palace of the capital city, but in fact, it was because of her strength. In the end, he was reduced to carrying a load, leading a horse, and doing some sewing, mending, and washing work, but today, in the face of the boundless Buddha light and the falling flowers, Sang Sang was suppressed. He took out his iron knife and wrote several talismans to break the power of Buddha. How could he not feel refreshed? The chief monk's voice sounded again in the Buddha's light. Buddhism wanted to kill her back then, and you helped her. Now you are still helping her. Why? Has the academy betrayed the will of the headmaster? Ning Kei said, the academy's defiance of nature is the academy's business. She is my wife. Even if there is a problem between us, it should be a conflict within our family. What is the Buddha doing? After hiding for so many years, he jumped out to take advantage of the couple when they weren't paying attention. Disgusting. The chief monk said, karma, karma, and karma. Ultimately, it all depends on the result. Ning Kei said, if the Buddha's karma is to turn the human world into the world at the foot of the mountain, then the academy will definitely not let his karma come true. The chief monk asked seriously, why? Ning Kei said, because it's disgusting. The chief monk remained silent. Ning Kei was in high spirits and would not stop there. He said loudly, Buddha is merciful? Among the tens of thousands of monks in Xiankong Temple, is there anyone who has the face to say where is this compassion? The chief monk said indifferently, then you go with Haotian. Ning Kei said, your pretentious look reminds me of me in the past. It's disgusting indeed. Holding the big black umbrella, Sang Sang looked at Ning Kei and said, you are quite disgusting now. Ning Kei said helplessly, understand your position and position, okay? At this moment, the great Buddhist scripture in the sky was still scattered into countless flower petals and fell down. It no longer emitted a strange fragrance, nor was it as powerful as before, but it was still extremely dangerous. The chief monk stopped talking, but there were still many people talking. Countless believers in the temples and fields at the foot of the peak kept chanting or praying. The light of Buddha on the cliff plateau gradually grew brighter. The Buddha had left countless foreshadowing for Haotian, which was as vast as the sea. How could Ning Kei solve it? And the most dangerous celestial device was still in the human world. It rained in Chaoyang City. The 72 monasteries looked solemn and dignified in the drizzle. When the bell rang in the Xiankong Temple in the depths of western wilderness, the bell rang in all 72 temples at the same time. The bell rang in every street and alley in the city, echoing in the hearts of all believers. The Buddhist bell could clear one's mind and alert one's mind. Whether it was the old woman in the alley or the young emperor in the palace, they all came to the temples under the guidance of the bell. All the Buddhist temples in Chaoyang City were crowded with believers. Men and women, young and old, knelt in front of the Buddha statue and kept kowtowing and praying. The White Tower Temple was even more so. The stone plateau in front of the lake was full of believers. The lake was very clean and calm. The beautiful white tower and weeping willows were reflected on the lake, which was the most famous scenery in Chaoyang City. It was the best memory for people living here. The autumn wind blew and the lake rippled. The white tower reflected on the lake gradually became distorted. This was a very common scene, but the believers who kept praying by the lake were extremely shocked. Because as the reflection of the white tower in the lake was distorted, the real white tower by the lake was also distorted. The tower shadow was an illusion. How could it affect the real white tower? The autumn wind gradually became stronger, whistling over the lake and shaking the lake. The tower shadow and the tree shadow on the lake were all crushed into pieces and could no longer be seen clearly. The white tower by the lake gradually became illusory, as if it was about to disappear in the air. The lake trembled more and more violently. The foaming waves looked like the clouds in the sky or the water in a pot of boiling water. The reflection of the white tower turned into foam and finally disappeared. There was a loud bang. The lake suddenly disappeared, leaving only the dry lake bottom. The white tower by the lake was also gone. The white tower had accompanied the believers of Yueluan Kingdom for countless years. It had long become their spiritual belief or life memory. But today, it just disappeared in front of them. Everyone who saw this had a feeling that they would never see the return of the white tower. The most famous scenery in Chaoyang City would never be reborn again. The believers were shocked and sad. They didn't know what to think at this time. They only knew that they could kneel by the lake and keep kowtowing and praying to the bottom altar of the white tower. They were even more pious than before. The sky above Xiankong Temple was always covered by thick clouds. Since Buddha wanted to destroy Haotian, he naturally couldn't let her see the clear sky. All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying sound of wind rang out from high up in the sky. The center of the clouds suddenly bulged to the ground for hundreds of feet. The bulging clouds were about to touch the top of the giant peak. Thunder and lightning flashed at the bottom, and then rain fell. This was not real rain, but the lake in the White Tower Temple from countless miles away in the human world. There were even many swimming fish and broken lotus branches in it. The heavy rain poured down, and the bulging clouds suddenly split open. A white tower broke out of the clouds and fell on the cliff plateau between the peaks. The white tower also came from countless miles away in the human world. With the awareness of all the believers of Buddha in the human world, it broke the space and came to the western Pure Land to suppress Haotian under the tower. In the autumn several years ago, the chief monk of scripture had thought of suppressing Sang Sang under the white tower. Several years later, in this autumn, the means left by Buddha finally made this scene a reality. The heavy rain fell on the cliff plateau, and the branches of the pear trees drooped. However, the small green pears and the green leaves didn't fall to the ground. Countless water flowed down the cliff edge and formed a thin waterfall. Holding the black umbrella, Sang Sang stood in the middle of the heavy rain, still looking calm. Ning Ke didn't have an umbrella, so he was instantly soaked by the rain. Several lotus branches like dead snakes hung on his shoulders, and a slippery loach crawled into his arms. He looked very embarrassed. What really made him feel uneasy was not the lake, but the white tower that broke out of the clouds. The bulging part of the clouds was very close to the peak, so the white tower soon passed the Mahavira Hall on the peak and unwaveringly suppressed the cliff plateau where he and Sang Sang were. The white tower that fell from the sky contained the supreme power of Buddha, and the light of Buddha on the cliff plateau also became stronger. There was a vague connection between the two that couldn't be broken. The cliff plateau was the palm of the Buddha's body. When the white tower fell, it would fall into the palm of the Buddha, because it was the most powerful instrument left by the Buddha in the human world. Ning Ke didn't mind that the Buddha wanted to take back his treasure, but he and Sang Sang were standing in the palm of the Buddha and couldn't leave. When the white tower fell, they would be suppressed. Then how could they turn the situation around? The white tower fell, and the power of Buddha approached. Ning Ke held the iron cutlass and looked around blankly. He didn't know how to deal with it. He turned his head and saw that the woman was still in a daze under the umbrella. He spat out a mouthful of blood. After wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, the woman was still in a daze. Ning Ke was helpless and in great pain. He shouted at her, "Oh my God! Why are you still in a daze at this time? Hurry up and use your divine ability." Sang Sang raised her head and looked at the white tower that was falling in the light of Buddha. The heavy rain suddenly stopped, and the clouds were suddenly quiet. The falling of the white tower suddenly slowed down, as if it was suspended in the air. It just slowed down, but didn't really stop. No matter how slow it was, as long as it didn't stop falling, the white tower would fall on the cliff plateau one day and press her and Ning Ke under the tower. To get rid of the current situation, they had to leave the cliff plateau. To leave the cliff plateau, they had to forcibly break the big world composed of the light of Buddha, scriptures, and the awareness of millions of believers. Buddha's Western Paradise. Sang Sang was not willing to pay such a high price, because there was still the academy in the human world. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the white tower in the air expressionlessly, thinking quietly. Seeing her like this, Ning Ke was very helpless. He waved the iron cutlass to cut the number of scriptures floating in front of the cliff and rushed to her side. He squeezed into the big black umbrella and shouted in her ear, "Wake up." Sang Sang's expression didn't change. She said, "I'm not asleep now." Ning Ke said, "Think of a way quickly. I don't want to be Su Xian." Sang Sang said, "It's the white snake under the tower." Ning Ke was very annoyed and said, "If you become the white snake, can I still stay outside the tower?" Sang Sang looked at the white tower and said, "I've been weakened by your academy. I can't break this tower." Ning Ke said, "So it's my responsibility?" "Well, even if it's my responsibility, you are Haotian. You must have some treasures with you, right?" Sang Sang looked at him and pointed to the big black umbrella. Ning Ke was very dissatisfied and said, "Look at how many treasures Buddha left. You only left this broken umbrella?" He emphasized the word broken. The big black umbrella was indeed broken now, but if it could perceive, it would feel very wronged. Sang Sang didn't feel wronged because only weak human beings would feel wronged. She said, "Only the weak would make so many preparations. I don't need anything in the human world." In her view, Buddha was the weak one. Ning Ke said, "The weak one you said is about to suppress you, the strong one." Sang Sang looked at him and said, "Do you think Buddha can defeat me with these methods?" Ning Ke said, "I'm watching this tragedy happen." Sang Sang said, "Whimsical." Ning Ke said, "Isn't he thinking about opening the sky? If I say it can't be opened, then it can't be opened." She suddenly looked at the luggage behind Ning Ke and the chessboard left by Buddha. She said expressionlessly, "Because I am Haotian, and you are nothing. This is the only chapter for today. I'm a little tired. Are you surprised? Well, I'm not kidding. This is indeed the only chapter for today. I watched a movie with my wife. I'm a little happy and tired. I came back a little late. Tomorrow will be a big hit. A big hit. I'm good at this rhythm. In fact, the most important thing in life is to be happy." Seeing that Ning Ke and his wife are still so happy in such an environment, I also hope that everyone can read happily and be happy in all kinds of ways. If anyone is unhappy, it's all my fault. Just blame me. Everyone, please give me some recommendation votes to make me and the moderators happy. Thank you. See you tomorrow. There will be a big hit. It's definitely not a lie. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 950. After saying that, Sang Sang's aura suddenly changed. She was still standing on the cliff platform, under the pear tree, right beside Ning Ke, sharing the same umbrella. However, in Ning Kei's eyes, she seemed to have suddenly become many times taller, as if she was about to touch the sky and look down at the white tower in the sky. Facing the Buddha's most powerful means, she responded with the immeasurability of the Buddhism sect. Ning Kei had seen the Abbey Dean's immeasurability and the drunkard's immeasurability. Only her immeasurability was truly immeasurability. The Xiankong temple felt her change. The bells all over the cliff and the chanting in countless temples did not stop. Instead, they became louder and louder with the change of her aura. Every word of the sutra chanted by the monks in the temple was as heavy as the temple itself. Rocks from the east and west peaks gradually fell. The bodies of the tens of thousands of monks shook uneasily. Blood gushed out of their mouths, but they still chanted the sutra. Ning Kei found that Sang Sang's face was a little pale and could not help but worry. Sang Sang knew what he was thinking and said calmly, "This is my world. No one can trap me." However, this was the Buddha kingdom, a very big world. As the bells of the Xiankong temple rang, the bells of the 72 temples in Chaoyang City rang at the same time in the autumn rain. The bells of the Lank temple on the Hua mountain, which was far away by the sea, began to ring. The bells of the Wanyan Tower temple in Chang'an did not ring. The Red Lotus temple, which had long been in ruins, only had a deformed bell, which began to ring in the autumn wind, like the crying of ghosts. There was a shabby nunnery outside the capital of the Yen kingdom, which had been abandoned for many years. Since last year, more than a dozen widowed and childless women were driven out of their homes by their families. Their land and houses were taken away. The women gathered in the shabby nunnery. They used tiles to shave off their hair that had not yet turned gray. Accompanied by the broken lamps and broken Buddha statues, they were hopelessly prepared to spend the rest of their lives there. Or they would suddenly die in the hands of bandits one night. Today, they suddenly heard the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. The women had lost all hope after being tortured by the cold and cruel life, but the sound of the bell seemed to have injected some kind of power into their bodies. They stood up and ran to the broken bell at the back of the nunnery. They clenched their fists and kept hitting the surface of the bell until their fists bled. It seemed that they wanted to vent all the resentment and despair they had accumulated over the years through the sound of the bell, so that they could find comfort in their next life. The sound from the broken clock was hoarse and unpleasant, as if they were crying loudly. In Chaoyang City, countless monks knelt in front of the Buddha statue and kept chanting sutras. Countless believers knelt in front of the lake and the white tower that had disappeared and kept praying to Buddha. In the Wanyan Tower temple in Chang'an, the monks were stunned to hear the bell ringing behind the courtyard. The stone statues seemed to come alive. In the Lank temple on Hua mountain, the abbot, monk Guanhai, looked solemn. He knelt in silence before the stone statue of Buddha on the peak. In the city and countryside, all the people who had been helped by the ascetic monks, no matter old women or children, knelt devoutly in the omnipresent sound of the bell and kept praying to Buddha. The bell, the chanting of sutras, and the sound of prayer rang in every corner of the human world. The human world was the Buddhist kingdom. As long as people believed in Buddha, they would enter the big world he left behind. The Western Pure Land. Sang Sang's face became paler and paler. She had underestimated the power of Buddha, but she was not flustered. Since these were all arranged by Buddha, Buddha must not be dead. Then as long as she found Buddha and killed him, the pure land that Buddha had set up in the human world would naturally be destroyed. All these methods would become illusions and no longer exist. And she had already found out where Buddha was. Ning Kei looked at her face and was very worried. Sang Sang suddenly turned to look at him and said, "Eat the green pear in your sleeve." Ning Kei was stunned. There was indeed a green pear in his sleeve. It was the first fruit from the pear tree by the cliff. But why did she want him to eat the green pear now? Soon he thought he understood what Sang Sang meant. Just like under the statue of Buddha on Hua mountain and in Master Chishan's cave, he could enter Buddha's chessboard as long as he ate the green pear. Could he leave Buddha's western Pure Land by entering the chessboard? Ning Ke trusted Sang Sang very much. It had nothing to do with the relationship between husband and wife, but because she was Haotian and could calculate everything in the world. However, he could not help but hesitate at this moment. After eating the green pear last time, it was only their consciousness or souls that entered the chessboard, but their bodies were still outside. Even if Sang Sang used her great power to let their bodies and souls enter the chessboard at the same time, what kind of danger would there be in the chessboard? He looked at the chessboard taken out from his luggage and at the blurry lines on it. He had a terrible guess. What if Buddha was hiding in the chessboard? There is no what if. Buddha is in the chessboard. Sang Sang put away the big black umbrella and looked at the scripture petals falling from the sky. She looked at the light of Buddha that appeared between the cliff plateau and enveloped her and Ning Quebec. She looked at the slowly falling white tower and said, "When I came to this mountain, Xiankong Temple was quiet and Buddha was speechless. Because I am Haotian, how dare they touch me?" Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Then why do they touch me now?" Sang Sang looked at him and said, "Because the pear on the tree was ripe and you picked it." Ning Ke looked at the small green pear in his right hand and the chessboard in his left hand. He vaguely understood something. Back then, Lank Temple was full of powerhouses, and Second Brother destroyed the Buddha's instrument and Dharma statue. Only the chessboard was still silent. Now he thought about it, there was indeed something wrong. When the green pear was ripe, we could enter the chessboard and see the real body of Buddha. The monks in the mountain began to fear, and so did Buddha. So they risked their 10,000 years of foundation to stop us. Why didn't I see Buddha when I entered the chessboard in Lank Temple? I didn't wake up at that time, so I couldn't see him. And it was meaningless for him to see me. Meaningless? Was Buddha also waiting to see you as Haotian? Yes. Sang Sang looked at the chessboard in his hand and thought, no wonder I couldn't find any trace of Buddha in the human world, and no wonder the heart of heaven always fell on Ning Ke's side when I looked around in Xiankong Temple. It's not that I can't leave this man, but that I have long noticed that Buddha is hiding in the chessboard. That's good. Ning Ke felt that the chessboard in his hand suddenly became very heavy. Anyone who knew that he was holding the world after Buddha's nirvana, or the Buddha's coffin, would have the same feeling. We know that Buddha is inside, but we still want to go in? He was a little uneasy. Sang Sang said, "I came to kill Buddha, and I know where Buddha is. Of course I have to go." Ning Ke was about to say something when he suddenly felt something in his mouth. Then, the sweet and delicious pear juice flowed down his throat and into his stomach. That green pear was eaten by him. What was done could not be undone, the rice had become porridge, and the pear had fallen into his stomach. What had already happened could not be changed. He quickly accepted this cruel reality and walked towards the green tree by the cliff. "What are you going to do?" Sang Sang asked. Ning Ke reached out to pick the pear and said, "You haven't eaten it yet." Sang Sang said, "I don't need it. I have been in this chessboard, and the chessboard is also my world." After saying this, there was a chess piece between her fingers. A few years ago, in Lank Mountain, she and Master Qishan played the last game of the 3 games of chess on Hua Mountain. The master asked her to choose a chess piece, and she did not hesitate to choose a black chess piece, which made the master sigh with emotion. 2 years ago, in the wilderness, the chess piece in her hand had changed from black to white. The headmaster in the carriage saw this scene, and the world changed. The headmaster knew all the causes and effects, and began to take her and Ning Ke on the long journey in the human world to make arrangements for Haotians coming to the human world. That chess piece had been in Sang Sang's hand, but now it was hard to tell what color it was. It seemed to be black and white, and it kept changing at will, as if it was the will of heaven. Ning Ke looked at the chess piece in her hand and thought of many things. He silently leveled the chessboard. She put the chess piece on the chessboard. There was no sound, and no wind blew. Ning Ke and Song Song's figures disappeared from the cliff plateau. The chessboard stayed in the air for a moment, and then fell on the cliff plateau, splashing a few drops of rain. A few drops of rain flowed out of the cliff and turned into several large waterfalls, making a thunderous sound in the valley. Without the obstruction of the power of heaven, the white tower from Chaoyang City whistled through the air and fell heavily on the chessboard. With a loud bang, it was shaken to the old temple behind the cliff. The old temple was shattered into ruins, and the road to the cliff cave was blocked by the white tower. The chessboard bounced on the cliff plateau for a few times, and then it stopped, raising a very gentle wind. As the wind blew, the green trees by the cliff kept shaking, and countless small green pears fell. Before the white tower broke through the clouds, thousands of hectares of lake water came from Chaoyang City and washed the cliff plateau like a rainstorm. However, it could not knock down a single green pear. At this time, these green pears fell with the wind like rain. Clap, clap, clap. In the noisy rain-like sounds, the green pears fell on the cliff plateau, softened by the rainwater. They were instantly shaken into juice, leaving only hundreds of pear pits. The pear pits were blown by the wind, fell along the waterfalls, and fell into the abyss at the foot of the mountain, never to be found again. This pear tree was planted by Buddha himself. It bloomed every 500 years, bore fruit every 5 days, and fell to the ground every 5 minutes. The pear fell to the ground and drifted with the current, never to be seen again. There were only 3 green pears left in Xiankong Temple for countless years. When Master Qishan left Xiankong Temple, he brought all 3 green pears to the human world. Because he was the illegitimate son of the chief preaching monk of that generation, he was not punished. The first green pear was used by Master Qishan to save tens of thousands of victims of the plague after the flood of South Jin Kingdom. Because of this, his Zen heart was backfired, and he lost all his state and became a useless person. The second green pear was used by Master Qishan to enlighten Master Lotus, who lived in the temple. Lotus was born beside the pear tree by the cliff of Xiankong Temple, meditating on Tao. It had to be said that it was fate or Buddha's fate. The third green pear was eaten by Sang Sang and Ning Ke, which let the master know Song Song's identity. From then on, a bloody journey began in the human world. 500 years later, the green pear tree in Xiankong Temple bloomed and bore hundreds of green fruits. Only one survived, and it was eaten by Ning Quebec. But this time, the matter to be decided was relatively simple. This green pear would decide life and death. The life and death of Haotian and Buddha. This is the first chapter. There will definitely be more today. Yesterday, I said that I would break out, so I must work hard. But I have to write it carefully. My hands are a little tired, so my speed will be slower. I will continue to work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 951. There was a gentle breeze on the cliff plateau. The white tower was built between the broken temple and the messy eaves. It was not as dazzling as it was by the lake in Chaoyang City, which was admired and loved by thousands of people. It was so dim that it felt decadent. Countless leaves fell from the heavy rain and hundreds of fruits fell from the wind. The branches of the green trees by the cliff were scattered like a naked woman. The waterfall at the bottom of the cliff seemed to be laughing at it loudly. The chessboard was lying in the rain on the cliff plateau. The clouds covering the vault of heaven had dispersed, and the light of Buddha on the cliff platform had disappeared. The scriptures glowing with golden light had dispersed with the clouds. There were no more petals falling down. The bells and the chanting of scriptures in the temple had also stopped. The monks walked out of the temples in the Xiankong temple and looked at the cliff plateau above. They felt uneasy and gradually calmed down. They returned to their temples and resumed their daily homework. The bells of countless temples in the world had also stopped ringing. The elders and abbots in the temples looked at the Buddha statue and were speechless. Suddenly, a welcoming monk came to report that a princess or a prince had come to offer incense. The elders and abbots all changed their expressions when they heard this. They put on the appearance of an enlightened monk and moved forward to welcome them. They were secretly thinking how much incense money they should collect today. Of course, they should not show too much of their worldly aura in case the nobles would be unhappy. They did not remember who the Buddha was at this moment. Countless believers in the human world also woke up. They rubbed their bruised foreheads and looked around in panic. They did not know what had happened. An old woman suddenly heard her grandson crying. She looked back and saw her grandson rolling off the bed with a bruise that was very similar to hers on his forehead. She could not help but panic. She hurriedly climbed up with her sore and numb body. She held her grandson in her arms and kept comforting him. She kicked the ground and said that it was the fault of the land. She did not remember who the Buddha was at this moment. In the shabby nunnery outside the capital of Yan Kingdom, the women looked at the broken bell which did not make a sound no matter how hard they hit it. They looked terrified. Could it be that they could not hear the bell anymore? Suddenly, they began to cry loudly. Even if they could get more blessings in the next life, how could they live such a miserable life in this life? In a daze, they walked back to the room covered with straw, knelt down with their palms together, and prayed to Buddha. In the wilderness at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, millions of people kneeling on the ground woke up one after another. When the nobles found themselves kneeling together with the untouchables, they couldn't help but feel very angry. They waved the whips in their hands and drew more than a dozen bloodstains on the bodies of several serfs before they felt a little better. The serfs were whipped more than a dozen times and were in great pain, but they did not dare to resist. They supported their tired bodies to work until late at night. After eating terrible food, they began to pray to Buddha before going to bed, silently praying that the merciful Buddha would guide them to the Western paradise as soon as possible. Most of the time, the beliefs of the human world were like this. Whether it was the Buddha or Haotian, they were easily forgotten. Of course, sometimes it was also very difficult to forget. Happy people tend to forget their faith, which is the last hope of the unfortunate. From this point of view, faith may be good, but at the same time, it means bad. Perhaps because of this, there was such a group of non-believers in the back of the mountain of the academy. There were many people who could understand this, but because of their position and standpoint, they could not and did not dare to express their opinions on this issue. Master Huang Yang walked out of the meditation room and listened to the chanting coming from the top of the mountain. He felt the tranquility from countless temples and found that nothing had happened here. In fact, many things had happened. Sang Sang and Ning Ke entered the chessboard by themselves. But in the eyes of the Xiankong temple, it was naturally Buddha who put Haotian and her attendants into the chessboard with the supreme Dharma and was purifying them. Master Huang Yang's monk robe fluttered in the wind. He went straight up the mountain road and was about to reach the cliff plateau. He was going to pick up the chessboard because Ning Ke was in it. Ning Ke was too important to the Tang Empire, and he could not watch him die. Master Huang Yang was an eminent monk of the Buddhism sect, but first of all, he was a Tang man. At this moment, a quiet and majestic voice came from afar. As I have heard, there is a mountain named Prajna, and it is 108,000 times heavier than Tianqi Mountain. The voice came from the distant cliff ground, from the chief preaching monk. This was the supreme Dharma of the Buddhism sect, words obey. Years ago in the White Tower Temple in Chaoyang City, the chief preaching monk told the eldest brother about this scripture. This scripture described a mountain named Prajna. The giant peak where the Xiankong temple was located was Prajna. As the Buddha's words were spoken, the cliff echoed and responded. The majestic Prajna mountain suddenly became heavier. Master Huang Yang, who was flying on the mountain road, suddenly stopped. With a crack, Master Huang Yang's leg bones were all broken. He was seriously injured by the mountain itself. Above the cliff on the edge of the giant sinkhole, the chief preaching monk's body was still buried in the ground. Only his head was above the ground. His 2 white eyebrows drooped in the dust, and his face was pale and weak. The chief preaching monk was integrated into the earth by Sang Sang. These days, he had been struggling under the endless pressure of the earth and was already exhausted. Now he had to use the words obey, which made him even more exhausted. A gust of autumn wind blew, and the faint fragrance of wine spread in the wind of the wilderness. The drunkard, who was still wearing a scholar's gown, appeared in front of the chief preaching monk's head. The drunkard did not look at the chief preaching monk's funny face, but stared at the cliff plateau between the giant peaks. His face was very pale, and his eyes were full of fear and anxiety. The chief preaching monk looked up at him with difficulty and said, "It seems that you already know what happened." The drunkard looked terrible and said, "Such a big movement. The whole human world knows about it. Even if I want to pretend that I don't know, how can I?" When the bell and scripture were ringing everywhere in the human world, he had been in the small town between Yen and Song. However, even though he was with the butcher, he still felt very uneasy, and drank tea with Mr. Chow for a long time. "I didn't expect that you really dared to attack Haotian," the drunkard murmured. The chief preaching monk said slowly, "This is the arrangement of the Buddha." The drunkard looked at the small crack under the chief preaching monk's neck, picked up a stone, and threw it in. The crack between the chief preaching monk's neck and the ground expanded instantly. That was because the stone was expanding inside, which was the immeasurable state of the Buddhism sect. After a while, the chief preaching monk climbed out from the ground. His Buddha's body that had reached the Vajra body did not have any scars, but his kasaya and the monk's staff had been crushed into powder by the ground. He stood in the autumn wind in the wilderness, naked, and did not look like a senior monk of the Buddhism sect at all. The chief preaching monk took a piece of clothing from the drunkard and said, "You learned the immeasurable Dharma from the Buddha years ago, and I used it to get out. Now that I think about it, it's all because of the fate of Buddha." The drunkard said, "This is the world of Haotian, and the fate of Buddha is unpredictable. If she did not go to the chessboard, would not be able to pull you out from the ground. So it's not the fate of Buddha, but the fate of heaven." The chief preaching monk said, "From today on, there is no fate of heaven, only fate of Buddha." The drunkard said, "I really don't know where your confidence comes from." The chief preaching monk said, "Follow me." The two left the cliff and came to the cliff plateau between the giant peaks. The chief preaching monk looked at the dilapidated pear tree and said after a long silence, "This tree was planted by the Buddha himself. The pear means separation, which means separation from the human world." The drunkard said seriously, "It blooms every 500 years. Has Haotian been gone for 500 years? The chief preaching monk said, "I don't know the age of the tree. Haotian can never return to the human world." The drunkard slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "If Haotian kills the Buddha, she can naturally return." The chief preaching monk said calmly, "The Buddha has reached nirvana. How can he be killed?" The drunkard frowned. Until now, no one knew whether the Buddha was alive or dead. This giant peak named Prajna was transformed from the Buddha's body. Then where was the Buddha's consciousness? The chief preaching monk knelt down to the chessboard in the rain and praised, "The Buddha knows the past and future for 5,000 years. He is not in the Xiankong temple or the Buddha's body. The Buddha is in this small chessboard. He has waited for Haotian for 5,000 years and finally met him today. How wise and merciful he is. The drunkard looked a little confused. If the consciousness of the Buddha was indeed in the chessboard, why did the chief preaching monk say that Haotian couldn't be destroyed? What was nirvana? Looking at the ordinary chessboard, he pondered for a long time but still got nothing. This chessboard was the battlefield ere the Buddha waited for Haotian. Unless the headmaster returned to the human world, no one could enter it. No one was qualified to participate in it, not even the drunkard. It was worth thinking that when Haotian entered the chessboard, there was another person beside him. Indeed, no one could enter the chessboard, but that person had entered the chessboard in advance. How would he affect the war? The drunkard said, "There is a problem." The chief preaching monk said, "What problem?" The drunkard said, "There is a person. In addition to heaven and Buddha, there was also a person on the chessboard." The chief monk said calmly, "Although Ning Kei's state has improved quite fast, he is only in the knowing destiny state. How could he be qualified to participate in such a high-level event?" The knowing destiny state was the peak of the 5 states of cultivation. However, the chief monk of scripture and the drunkard were powerhouses who had surpassed the 5 states, so they did not care. Even they could not touch the battle of heaven and Buddha, let alone Ning Quebec. The drunkard said sternly, "Even if he can't influence what happens in the chessboard, he can influence the world outside the chessboard. How can the academy ignore him when he is in the chessboard?" The academy had eldest brother in 23-year cicada cultivation, 2 powerhouses who had surpassed the 5 states, and Jun Mo, who no one knew how powerful he would be if he got angry. If these people knew that the Buddhism sect trapped Ning Kei in the chessboard, what would they do? What would they do? Will Jun Mo flip out? The chief monk said with a smile, "Didn't the Abbey Dean ask you to deliver the message because he predicted today's situation?" No one knew where Sang Sang and Ning Kei were at this moment, not even they themselves. Looking at the familiar streets and the people's clothes, they were silent for a long time. Ning Kei was so lost in thought that he even forgot to close the big black umbrella. There were many shrines along the streets, in which there were statues of Buddha and Venerable. The smell of spices filled the air, including spices for food and incense for the Buddha. The passers-by looked very happy. He and Sang Sang entered the chessboard, but they found themselves in Chaoyang City. What's going on? You ask me, but who should I ask? Ning Kei looked at Sang Sang and sighed, "Of course you should ask Buddha." Sang Sang put her hands behind her back and walked to the street. She said, "Then we have to find him first." Chapter 2, My wife and I went to walk the dog and took a break. Chapter 3, Try to get out before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 952. Suddenly, a bell rang in a temple not far away from the street. Ning Kei was folding his umbrella. He was tortured by the bell in Xiankong Temple. Hearing the bell again, he was shocked and grabbed Sang Sang's hand. Sang Sang looked at him with no emotion in her eyes. Then Ning Kei remembered that he had left Xiankong Temple. He let go of her hand in embarrassment and put his hand behind his back like she did. The bell in Chaoyang City was ringing louder and louder, and all the temples were ringing. Ning Kei could clearly hear that the loudest bell came from the north of the city, which should be the ancient bell in White Tower Temple. Some pedestrians were eating starched jelly, some were eating pilaf with banana leaves, and some were watching monkey shows. Hearing the bell, they put down what they were doing and walked to the nearest temple. Some people could not leave, so they knelt on the street and kept praying with their palms put together. The monkey show man also knelt on the ground in fear and trepidation. He even pressed the naughty monkey to the ground and kowtowed. Only Ning Kei and Sang Sang were left standing. Although the devout followers of the Buddhism sect did not look at them with hostility, they could not help but feel puzzled. The changes brought about by the bell were actually very cute, like some kind of flash mob that Ning Ke had seen in that world. The little monkey that was gently pressed by its owner kept rolling its eyes, which was also very cute. But Ning Ke suddenly felt a little disgusted because he had seen the tragic world under the Xiankong temple. Sang Sang hated these scenes even more. She gently flicked her sleeves. With a light brush, flowers bloomed on the green sleeves. A gust of wind rose on the street, blowing away the starch jelly stall and blowing away the rice grains on the banana leaves. Many people were blinded by the wind. The man who was playing the monkey tried to rub his eyes, but he forgot to grab the rope. The little monkey, who had regained its freedom, ran out immediately. It didn't run too far away. It just looked for the fragrant and spicy rice grains among the flying banana leaves and ate happily. The bell of the temple on the street was also blown by the gust of wind, and the rhythm of the bell became messy. The wind did not stop and went up to the sky, messing up the clouds over Chaoyang City. Sang Sang was somewhat satisfied and continued to walk forward with her hands behind her back. Looking at her back, Ning Ke fell silent. When she was in the West Hill Divine Palace, she did not need to do anything. She did not even have to think about it. She only needed to feel a little uneasy and stars would appear and disappear in her eyes. Countless clouds would appear from thousands of miles away and thunder and lightning would appear on the top of Peach Mountain. However, after leaving the West Hill, especially after entering the depths of the wilderness, she began to flick her sleeves when she was in a fight or when she was angry. Sang Sang's divine might was still far beyond the scope of human imagination, but compared to the once omnipotent Sang Sang, she had indeed become much weaker. Ning Ke was a little uneasy, but he could not say anything. The reason why she was getting weaker was because the headmaster had left the power of the human world in her body. It was because of the long and happy journey 2 years ago, but now that he thought about it, it was such a dangerous journey. More importantly, it was because he took her to walk in the human world and did not let her go back. The streets were filled with smoke and dust blown by the wind. The smoke and dust were full of the smell of spices, and it was a little choking. Perhaps it was because the people here were used to it since they were young, but there was no sound of coughing. Walking in the smoke and dust was also walking on the old road. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had lived in this city for a long time. He once fled here with her on his back. Many streets and alleys were left with his footprints and blood stains of the people he killed. However, after nearly 3 years, those bloodstains had long disappeared. It seemed incredible to enter the chessboard on the cliff plateau of Xiankong Temple and come out in Chaoyang City. In fact, there was only one possibility. Just like in Lank Temple, there was also a space passage between Xiankong Temple and Chaoyang City, and this chessboard was the key to open this space passage. Back then, Ning Ke and Sang Sang came directly from Lank Temple in the southeast to Xiankong Temple in the depths of the western wilderness. Today, they came directly from Xiankong Temple to Chaoyang City. At this time, the two of them were walking in Chaoyang City. It seemed that they were naturally looking for the traces of Buddha. However, both Sang Sang and Ning Ke were very clear that Buddha could not be in this city. In the human world, it was impossible to hide from Haotian's eyes. Ning Ke did not point this out, nor did Sang Sang. It seemed that the two of them were really looking for Buddha. Since they were looking for him, it would naturally take time. "Let's find a place to stay first, and then slowly look for him," he said. Sang Sang did not speak. Her silence meant that she agreed. If she wanted to object, she would speak directly or cut Ning Ke into pieces to show her attitude. In a noisy block in the north of the city, there was a very quiet and even deathly courtyard. It was the small courtyard that the two of them used to live in. Several years had passed, but no one had come to visit it. Pushing open the courtyard door, the small courtyard was still so quiet. The black cloth that Ning Ke used to cover the window was still hanging, but it was covered with a lot of dust. The putty that was smeared on the cracks of the woodshed window had already cracked and peeled off. Sang Sang looked at the shabby courtyard. A wet wind came from the back of the courtyard and instantly carried away all the dust in the house. The small courtyard suddenly became very clean. She pushed open the door of the woodshed. After thinking for a while, she did not go in. Instead, she turned into the bedroom and lay on the bed. Now she was no longer the daughter of Yama and naturally did not need to hide from anyone. "Cook more vegetables for dinner," she said. Ning Ke nodded and walked to the courtyard to prepare firewood for cooking. Looking at the lonely small tree, he was a little reluctant to do it. Where was the black crow on the branch? The stream behind the courtyard was still there, and there was still a tree by the stream. He chopped off enough wood with his palm and was about to leave when he suddenly saw a deep fist mark on a tree. Back then, he had to take care of Sang Sang, who was seriously ill, and always be on guard against the pursuit of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. He was always anxious and nervous. When he was about to give up, he went to the stream and wanted to vent his anger by punching the tree. However, he did not expect that his fist was so hard that it almost broke the tree. Looking at the fist mark on the tree, Ning Ke laughed. He was very happy that the tree was not broken, and he was also very happy that his fist mark was still there, because these were his most cherished memories. Just like the tree in the courtyard and the black crow that had once landed on it. Piling the wood in the corner of the courtyard, he pushed open the bedroom door and walked to the bed. Looking at Sang Sang, who was sleeping soundly, he asked, "What do you want to eat?" "I'm not familiar with the produce of the Yueluan kingdom." Sang Sang opened her eyes, which were bright and clear, without any tiredness or sleepiness after waking up. Ning Ke had never understood what sleep meant to her. She thought for a while and said, "I'll go shopping with you." The two went to the market and bought a lot of vegetables. Then they went to the grocery store to buy rice, oil, salt, vinegar, pots and pans. They also bought a caddy of streaky pork and went home to make a sumptuous dinner. It was Ning Ke's job to carry the vegetables, cook and wash the dishes. During this process, Sang Sang just followed him with her hands behind her back. Sometimes she looked at him, and sometimes she looked at the sky. Ning Ke squatted in front of the basin and washed the dishes. He felt that this work was even harder than when he killed the horse gang. After a while, he felt sore all over. Looking at Sang Sang at the door with her hands behind her back, he could not help but get annoyed. "I can't beat you now, so I'll just do more housework. It's fine if you don't want to help." Haotian, of course, is honorable. How can he be involved in such matters? "It's fine if you just watch from the side, but can I trouble you with one thing? Can you not put your hands behind your back?" He complained, "You're like a leader inspecting your work. It hurts my enthusiasm." Sang Sang ignored him and walked into the room. She looked around with her hands behind her back and said, "I want tea." God said let there be light, so there was light in the world. Sang Sang was the god of this world. If she said tea, there would be tea. She could make countless kinds of good tea, but for some reason, she wanted Ning Ke to buy them. Ning Ke was indeed a little tired, but also happy. Because he knew that Sang Sang's behavior proved that she had a deeper connection with the human world. She was becoming more and more like a human. That night, he knocked on the door of the largest tea house in Chaoyang City and bought 74 kinds of the most famous tea from each country with 2 taels of silver. At the same time, he packed several sets of expensive tea sets. After drinking tea for 3 days, Sang Sang suddenly said, "I want to play chess." So Ning Ke searched everywhere for the best chess sets. But this time, it was more troublesome to satisfy Sang Sang's request, because chess always needed an opponent. "You're too weak." Sang Sang looked at the white pieces on the chessboard and said to him. As a man, what he hated most was losing to his woman in chess or cards. Ning Ke was already in a bad mood at this time. Hearing this, he was even more annoyed. We lowly human beings are no match for the almighty Haotian. This was Sang Sang's most common evaluation of human beings. But it sounded bitter coming from his mouth. Sang Sang's expression didn't change. She said, human beings are indeed lowly, but some people are relatively better. Chen Pipi is much better than you in this aspect. As a man, what he really hated most was to be judged by his own woman as inferior to another man, even if that man was a good brother who had gone through thick and thin with him. Ning Ke said angrily, I can't get him from Lingang City. Sang Sang said, then you have to think of another way. The next day, the 3 most famous chess players in Chaoyang City were invited to the small courtyard by Ning Quebec. Or rather, kidnapping was more appropriate. In addition to drinking tea, playing chess, and listening to plays, Ning Ke and Sang Sang would sometimes go to Chaoyang City to see the White Tower and walk by the lake. She still habitually put her hands behind her back. Dozens of days passed peacefully like this. They seemed to be looking for something in Chaoyang City, but in fact, they were looking for nothing. They didn't ask where to go or what to do. They only asked what to eat the next day. One night, Ning Ke peeled a mangosteen and put the white kernel in front of Sang Sang's face. He laughed and said, doesn't this look like a butt? Sang Sang rarely showed any expression on her face. He had always been a little unwilling. This time, he also failed. Sang Sang looked at him quietly for a long time. Suddenly, she said, are we greedy? Ning Ke was silent for a moment. He put the mangosteen in his hand into her mouth. Then he walked to the courtyard and played a set of bladesmanship. He fetched some water from the stream and took a bath. He said, I'm going to sleep. Sang Sang sat by the table and looked at the tree outside the window. She didn't say anything. She used to want to return to Haotian's divine kingdom because it was her mission. As long as she got rid of Buddha and killed Ning Ke, she could go back. But she and Ning Ke were born together. If Ning Ke died, she would die too. It would be Haotian who returned to the divine kingdom. She would no longer have the name Sang Sang. She would no longer be herself. She wanted to continue being herself. She wanted to continue having the name Sang Sang. What made her even angrier and more uneasy was that she actually wanted to continue living with him in the small courtyard like this. Green vegetables, fat meat, white rice, tea, and chess games were not a bad experience. So she didn't think about Buddha, the academy, Taoism, the divine kingdom, or the human world. As long as these days continued, she would continue to be herself, and she would continue to have him by her side. Yes, she was really greedy. Ning Ke once asked outside Chang'an, how can there be a perfect way in the world? I won't let Chang'an down or let you down. In fact, he knew that there was no such perfect way in the world. He was not afraid of death. He could actually threaten Sang Sang to go to Chang'an with suicide, and then the academy would use the God-stunning array to suppress her. Neither the Buddhism sect nor Taoism sect could do anything about it. But he was reluctant. So he took her to live in this small courtyard in Chaoyang City, ignoring what was happening in the human world. He didn't think about the academy or Buddha. He didn't think about anything. Yes, he was also very greedy. He was greedy for a moment of pleasure. After that night's conversation, Ning Ke and Sang Sang never talked about this again. The ordinary life in the human world went on peacefully. They had been in Chaoyang City for half a year, and the outside world had nothing to do with them. Chaoyang City was very lively after the beginning of spring. There were theaters everywhere. One evening, Ning Ke and Sang Sang returned from the theater. They bought half a pound of pig head meat on the street and had a simple dinner. Looking at the few pieces of pig head meat left in the bowl, Sang Sang suddenly said, "There's too little food. Ning Ke thought that no one would have the patience to cook a table full of food every day. He naturally changed the topic, cook something delicious tomorrow. By the way, did you like the play today? Sang Sang stood up and walked out of the courtyard without any expression on her face. Ning Ke was slightly startled. He put the bowl and chopsticks into the basin, wiped the water on his hands, and chased after her. Standing in the woods by the stream, she looked at the sky in silence with her hands behind her back. Ning Ke looked at the fist mark on the tree and found that it had become much fainter because of the regeneration of the bark in less than half a year. Naturally, it also looked much fainter. His mood became indifferent. Was he going to leave after all? Sang Sang said, being together doesn't mean being together. Ning Ke understood what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, being together is because we should be together. It's not that I want to keep you in the human world in this way. Sang Sang did not speak for a long time. Ning Ke said, you know what I'm thinking. Sang Sang said, yes, I know what you're thinking. But it's still greed. Ning Ke looked at the side of her face and said, greed is not a sin. Sang Sang looked at the sky and said, it's wrong. What is greed? Love is greed. Because you like it, you will be greedy. Even a moment of greed in the human world is better than countless divine kingdoms. But a moment is too short after all. For 1,000 words, I have already written 10,000 today. I will continue to write. My leader saw that I wrote it seriously, so she did not let me accompany her to walk the dog. I like this chapter, but not the next one. I will go to eat now. The next chapter will definitely be late. Don't worry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 953. Ning Ke looked at the fist print on the tree and asked, what's wrong? Sang Sang did not say anything. She walked back to the small courtyard with her hands behind her back, and he followed her. It was early spring and the tree in the courtyard did not have many leaves. She walked to the tree and looked at the trembling branches. She said, since it's not true, then let me go. Since Ning Ke thought that they were just living together, and it was not a way for him to keep her in the human world, then he should not stop her when she wanted to leave. You can leave at any time, Ning Ke said behind her. Sang Sang looked at the branches. Amidst the flapping of its fan, a black crow landed where she was looking. She said, if I really want to leave, you will kill yourself. Ning Ke did not say anything. Sang Sang turned around and looked at him. She asked, do you want me to die so badly? This was the 6th time she said this to Ning Ke, or thought of it in her heart. I just don't want you to go. Ning Ke did not avoid her eyes and said, even if you leave, where can you go? You have been to the human world, how can you sit in the cold divine kingdom for a long time? Sang Sang said, I should be there. Ning Ke said, where is that? You often say that this is the world of Haotian, and the divine kingdom must be in this world. Then what is the difference between the divine kingdom and the human world? Sang Sang said, now your teacher is there. Ning Ke said, why do you have to stop my teacher? Why do you have to stop us? Don't you want to know what is outside this world? This is my world. I am the rule of this world. My existence comes from the unique characteristics of this world. If you want to destroy the characteristics of this world, then I cannot exist. Sang Sang looked at his eyes and said calmly, this is the most fundamental contradiction between me, your teacher and the academy. It cannot be solved. If you insist, you will kill me. Do you want me to die so badly? This was the 7th time. Ning Ke looked at her quietly and said, don't go back. Become a real person, and we will live together. Sang Sang said, people will die. Ning Ke said, cultivation can lead to longevity. We will cultivate together. Sang Sang said, I want to maintain the existence of this world. Ning Ke said, I don't understand. There are obviously other ways to solve this problem. Why do you have to guard this old world? What are you guarding? Sang Sang said, I don't understand either. Why do you and some humans in history have to leave this world? What do you want to know? Ning Ke said, what we want to know is very simple. We want to know what's out there. Sang Sang said, I don't want to know. All of her logical thinking, to be more precise, all of her life carried the objectivity of rules. If the human instinct was to yearn for freedom, then her instinct was to be self-contained and self-consistent. Ning Ke took a step forward and stood in front of her. The crow on the branch cawed coldly. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, become human, then we will live together, cultivate together, buy groceries together, eat together, and do many things together. Sang Sang had never looked at herself in the mirror since she came to the human world. She was not very happy with the face she made according to the most mediocre human face and the tall body she made according to her own will. So at this moment, she felt strange and confused when she looked at the woman in Ning Ke's eyes. Why do you want to do this? Even if it's for human beings, and of course, most importantly for me, please stay. In Sang Sang's eyes, the ordinary face in his eyes suddenly shattered into countless pieces of light and shadow, unable to gather together again, so her eyes returned to indifference. No. She looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, countless years ago, human beings chose me and woke me up from the chaos. They wanted me to bring them eternal peace. Ning Ke didn't know what to say. He didn't understand why his words made her react so violently. He thought it was the choice of human beings that made her wake up, but after hearing her next words, he realized it was because of him. Now I can understand that imagination and curiosity about the outside world are instinctive desires of human beings. But those people don't include you, because you are not from this world. Sang Sang looked at him and said, you come from outside the world, so you know very well what the outside world is like. You have been telling me about that world since 20 years ago. I haven't forgotten it, and I can clearly see the picture of that world in your consciousness. Ning Ke felt his body gradually become cold. He said, that world is very beautiful and full of vitality. There are countless real suns, and it is full of warmth. You are lying. Sang Sang's voice was still so calm, without any extra emotion. But her words were like thunder exploding in the sky above Chaoyang City. Countless people were shocked and looked up at the sky. Your world is full of danger. The burning sun may explode at any time, and it may go out at any time. Most of the places are as cold as the netherworld. Be it the weak ordinary people or the stronger cultivators, none of them can survive in that world. Ning Ke said, the life of a star is hundreds of millions of years. How can it explode at any time? I admit that most of the places are cold, but that world is really big, and it can always find a suitable place. Sang Sang said, even hundreds of millions of years is just a very short time for life that needs eternal life. Not to mention that your world will eventually go to nirvana, and nothing will be left. Ning Ke was silent for a long time, and then said, or, there will be some memories left? Sang Sang's words left no room for warmth. There is no temperature, and there is nothing. Nirvana is the end. There is no eternity, and that is the greatest horror. Ning Ke shook his head and said, it's not like that. I admit that you are right. The outside world may really go to nirvana, but in the long years before that, life can walk to the edge of the world, or directly break the world, and find the way to a new world. Sang Sang said, what if it can't be found? Ning Ke didn't know why he was a little angry. He said in a low voice, you have never lived in that world. How can you be sure that human beings can't find a new world? Because I am not a human being. I never deceive myself as a comfort. Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, compared to my world, the outside world is more like the netherworld. What you want to do will make me think of you as the son of Yama. Ning Ke hadn't heard of the son of Yama for a long time. Many years ago, including some people in the great divine priest of light, had been guessing that he was the son of Yama. Later, the title fell on Long Qing for a short time, and finally Sang Sang took over the name. Now he naturally knew that there was no Yama, and Haotian was Yama. But at the same time, he had to admit that Sang Sang was right to some extent. The world he had lived in was so cold, so turbulent, and so dangerous compared to this world, just like the kingdom of Yama. He came here from that world, brought the information of that world here, and strengthened the belief of the academy in the headmaster of the academy. If the Haotian world was really broken and went to a wider universe, but was eventually destroyed, then his arrival would bring the shadow of Yama to this world. This speculation made him very cold, and he subconsciously became angry. He looked at Sang Sang and shouted, "You always want to win in everything, even in a discussion. You have never admitted defeat, not even once. Why?" Sang Sang looked at him quietly with a slightly pitiful expression. Her expression made him even angrier. He walked to the tree and slapped it heavily. The black crow on the branch looked down at him, but didn't fly away, nor did it make an unpleasant sound. "It's been so many years. Ever since you could speak, I've always listened to you. In other people's eyes, you're my little handmaiden who serves me every day. When I say go east, you don't dare to go west. When I say eat dry rice, you don't dare to boil the rice. But you should know very well what the real situation is. Before I say go east, you look to the east first. When I say eat dry rice, that's because you poured out the leftover porridge the night before." Ning Ke turned to look at her and shouted angrily. "In Min Mountain, I risked my life to catch a deer. You just looked at me, and I let it go. When you were 8 years old in the city of Wei, the fat ant proposed marriage for you on behalf of her distant nephew. You were not happy, and I almost killed that boy that night. You said you wanted to go back to Chang'an, so I went back. You said you wanted to sell your calligraphy, so I wrote for sale. You said you wanted to rent the shop on Lin 14th Street, so I rented it. In the end, I almost sold my life to Cao Xiaoshu. For you, I slapped Long Qing's face swollen. Just because he used you to threaten me, I didn't care if I offended the West Hill Divine Palace or caused trouble for the academy. I directly shot him into an idiot. Well, I was chased by Yi Hongyu like a dog. And this broken place." He pointed to the small courtyard, looked at her and said in a trembling voice, "Was it fun to turn yourself into the daughter of Yama? For me, it was really not fun at all. The whole world wanted to kill you, and I was the only one who carried you on my back. I was really scared at that time. I couldn't beat them, did you know that? But I still fought them, didn't I?" Sang Sang did not speak, but just looked at him quietly. "I have never disobeyed your opinion. I will do whatever you want, and I will not hurt you. There is no such possibility in my mind. It has been like this since the day I found you in Hebei province. I pity you, I love you, and I value you more than my own life." Ning Ke's voice gradually became lower, but his emotions became more agitated. He said, "Because I was also abandoned by the whole world at that time. At that time, only you were by my side. You survived because of me, and I survived because I had to support you. What is natal? This is natal." Sang Sang looked up at the sky, which was gradually being invaded by the darkness, and did not speak. The black crow perched on the branch slightly tilted its head to look at the two people in the courtyard, as if it wanted to figure out the current situation. "Youngest uncle was killed by you, but I was not born at that time, so I could ignore it. But I can no longer say that I have nothing to do with my teacher's death. Ning Kei's voice became a little hoarse, very low, and very tired, as if he would collapse at any time. She did not know whether it was because he had talked too much or because he was too emotional. At that time by the Sisui River, I could have stopped you, because you are my natal, but I didn't. I thought it was because I forgot, but later I found out that I didn't. It was just that I instinctively let myself forget it, because I was really afraid of your death. He looked up at the stars in the night sky and the moon that was about to appear. After a moment of silence, he continued, I have never told anyone about this. But in fact, everyone knows about it. Even the senior brothers and sisters in the academy know about it. But they have never mentioned it. For you, I can give up everything, I can be shameless, I can give up my life, not to mention loyalty, righteousness, honor, and morality. If it was in the past, I could kill everyone in the world for you. As long as you are alive, as long as you are well, I don't care what others think of me, how they talk about me, how they laugh at me, how they hate me, and how they are afraid of me. Ning Kei looked back at her and said with tears in his eyes, but, not this time. My senior brothers and sisters in the academy, and those people in Chang'an, they are very good to me, and also to you. If I let you go back, my teacher will die, the Tang Empire will be destroyed, and there will be no academy in the world. So I can't listen to you. The moon finally appeared in the night sky, just behind him, but it was not bright, because the moon waxed and waned. The moon tonight was so dim, as if it could be extinguished at any time. I will die, too. When Ning Kei spoke, Sangsang had been silent until now. She looked at him and said calmly, if it weren't for the academy and you, I wouldn't have been forced into such a mess by those monks in the Xiankong temple. You should know that I am getting weaker day by day. If you don't let me go back to the divine kingdom, I will die one day. Don't talk about becoming a real human and then cultivating. I have said that I don't like to deceive myself. I am Haotian, how can I become a human? If I become a human, will I still be who I am now? How can you guarantee that I will be alive? The headmaster of the academy was the first person in the world of Haotian for tens of thousands of years. Haotian's coming to the human world was also something that had never happened in history. As for him, the guest from the outside world, he was even more special. No one knew the final ending of the story written by the three of them. Haotian didn't know, the headmaster didn't know, and Ning Kei didn't know either. So he couldn't answer this question. He could only walk to the door of the kitchen and turn back to ask her, shall I cook a bowl of noodles for you? Sangsang looked at him quietly. There was no disappointment in her eyes, only indifference. I have no appetite. After saying this, she walked back to the bedroom and covered herself with the quilt. Like a child who was angry, she pulled the quilt up high to cover her face, as if it would make her feel better. After a while, Ning Kei walked into the bedroom, lifted the quilt and helped her up. She said, I don't want to eat noodles. Ning Kei said, warm your feet before you sleep. Sangsang then saw a pot of hot water in front of the bed. Ning Kei squatted down and took off her shoes. He tested the water temperature and found that it was just right. He put her white feet in the water and carefully washed them, not even the gaps between her toes. It was a quiet night. Sangsang didn't get up when she woke up in the morning. Instead, she continued to lie on the bed and look at the roof. A spider web was formed on the clean beam, and the spider waited quietly at the edge of the web. When an insect bumped into the web, it would crawl over and kill the food in the most enthusiastic way, and then greedily suck the delicious juice. We can't go on like this. We need to make a decision. She turned sideways and looked at Ning Kei's face. She said, if you don't let me go, I will kill everyone. Ning Kei rubbed his eyes and said, there is no rice left. Remind me to buy a bag of rice when you buy vegetables. They cooked a pot of porridge with the remaining rice in the rice jar. After they finished it, they went to the market. They went to the rice shop first. When Ning Kai was about to pay, he suddenly found that there was a head in the bag of rice. It was the head of the rice shop owner. Blood seeped out of the bag. As for the rice in the bag, it had long been dyed red. It looked like the blood rice of the kingdom of Qi, and it gave off a disgusting smell of blood. The shop assistants and the women who bought rice screamed at the scene and rushed out of the shop. However, they became dead before they could step over the threshold. Hao Tian had countless ways to kill a person. She could make a person die quietly, with a happy expression, as if he was still sleeping and in the sweetest dream. But obviously, Sang Sang did not choose this method. In order to make Ning Kai feel more direct and show her determination, she used a very bloody method. The rice shop was full of broken limbs. Ning Kai looked at her with a pale face. He wanted to say something, but he could not. He walked out of the rice shop and did not dare to buy vegetables again. He lowered his head and walked quickly between the stalls. No matter how those familiar vegetable sellers called him, he ignored them and even forgot that he was still carrying a bag of rice stained with blood. Sang Sang did not want to let him go. Although he did not do anything, as he moved, the vegetable stalls he passed turned into a pool of blood. Those vegetable sellers died miserably. Enough. Ning Kai stopped at the entrance of the market. The street in front of him was full of people. He did not dare to take another step forward. He could only turn around and shout at Sang Sang angrily. There was blood everywhere in the market. It had already reached the soles of his shoes. Sang Sang walked in the sea of blood without any emotion on her face. Looking at this scene, Ning Kai's body trembled. Then, he gradually calmed down. His pale face was full of exhaustion. He looked at Sang Sang and said, "It doesn't work on me." Sang Sang said, "I want to try. Besides, what if it was a Tang who died?" Ning Kai did not say anything. He began to feel nervous. Because she had already thought. Thought was anger. Anger was anger. And anger came from different places. 4 chapters, 15,000 words completed. I wish everyone a happy weekend. I am a little tired from writing, but I am satisfied with the content, so I am in a good mood. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 954. Anger came from different perspectives, different names, and different nature of life. Tofu pudding was salty or sweet, zongzi was meat or vegetable, and life or death. You want to kill people just because of different choices? You know I'm cold-blooded. You killing the Tangs will make me angry and sad, but it won't change my mind. Ning Kai looked at the market that had become a sea of blood and the broken limbs around the stall. He said, "You were chosen by human beings. Without human beings, you wouldn't have appeared. You can't treat them like this." Sang Sang frowned and said, "It was human beings' choice that I woke up. Do I have to let them decide my life and death? Can parents decide their children's life and death?" Ning Kai said, "No one wants you to die." She said calmly and firmly, "When I was born in the human world, I was secretly sent out of the mansion by that housekeeper. She wanted to drown me in a cesspool. It was also on that day in the woodshed that another housekeeper approached you with a hatchet. My life and death were almost decided by someone else, and so were yours. In the end, you snatched the hatchet. After I survived, I didn't want my life and death to be decided by someone else." Ning Kai was silent for a moment and said, "Yes, life and death can only be decided by oneself. Sang Sang said, I don't want to die as long as I'm alive. Ning Kei's anger gradually turned into confusion. He didn't know how to calm her down. Her slightly trembling hands could kill people, and her thoughts could also kill people. He walked through the sea of blood and came to her. He reached out to hold her hand and gently pulled her into his arms. Then he hugged her tightly and sadly said in her ear, I don't want you to die either. Sang Sang's body was a little stiff and then gradually softened. She clumsily leaned on his shoulder. Because they were about the same height, it looked a little uncoordinated. I'd rather die than you. The two stood between the sea of blood and the broken bodies and held each other tightly. They looked calm and even sacred. Countless light spots flew out from them like stars and floated in all directions. As the light spots fell, the sticky blood on the ground of the market gradually faded until it was invisible. The bodies and the blood also disappeared, as if they had been purified by the divine. The pungent smell of blood could no longer be smelled in the market. There was only the smell of chicken feces, the earthy smell of river fish, the touching smell of onions, and the unique smell of vegetables. There was still dew on the green vegetables, which made them look extremely alluring. The newly unearthed tender bamboo shoots were arranged neatly and even had some dirt on them. They didn't look dirty but looked extremely beautiful. The market was filled with shouts and haggling sounds. Mothers were beating their children, puppies were fighting over bones, and wild cats were startled. Pa, pa, woof, woof, meow. It was a noisy mess. 2 copper coins for this scallion isn't expensive, right? Ning Kei opened his eyes and saw that the auntie was holding out a handful of tender green onions in front of him. Her face was full of pride, as if she thought that Ning Kei wouldn't feel embarrassed if he didn't buy it. He shook his head with a smile and patted Sang Sang in his arms to wake her up. Then he took her hand and walked out of the market. He didn't have any rice or vegetables in his hands, but he wasn't worried that there would be nothing to eat in the courtyard. As long as there is love, drinking water will fill one's stomach. Sang Sang didn't leave. She and Ning Kei continued to live an ordinary life in Chaoyang City, hiding from the wind and rain outside, walking between the courtyard and the market, and strolling by the stream. Ning Kei was in charge of cooking, and Sang Sang was in charge of eating. Occasionally, when she was in a good mood, she would cook a bowl of fried egg noodles for Ning Quebec. There were still 4 Sichuan peppercorns and 30 chopped green onions in the clear soup. If you wanted to avoid boredom, you had to find ways to find new interests, see new sights, or relive old times from time to time. Ning Kei was very smart. Relying on the taste in his memory, he successfully taught himself the hot and sour sliced noodle soup. According to Sang Sang's expression, the taste was at least 70% as good as the one at Lin 47th Street. He buried 2 jars of yellow wine under the tree in the courtyard and made a jar of pickles in the kitchen. The jar was stuffed with milk, tender ginger, and green and red peppers. Anyone would drool when he opened the lid. Sang Sang was very satisfied with the pickles he made, but for some reason, she still liked to eat the simplest cabbage head in vinegar the most. They often left the hospital for a walk, watching the sunset over the lake, listening to the bell in the temple, and strolling around Chaoyang City. It was as if they had become lazy like this lazy city. In the spring rain, they visited the legendary 72 temples. In the autumn, they went to some other big cities in the Yueluan kingdom. In the cold snow, they went to the north. They spent the whole night in the bleak scenery of the Blue Pass. They held hands while they were doing these things. Perhaps it was because of the long walk, Sang Sang was a little tired and went to sleep when they returned to the small courtyard. From that day on, she became a little drowsy and slept longer and longer. When she slept, Ning Kei would lie beside her and read. He would hold her hand under the quilt with one hand while holding the book. Sometimes he would forget to put his hand back after turning a page. Sang Sang, who was sound asleep, would subconsciously reach out and pull his hand back under the quilt, holding it tightly in front of her chest and refusing to let go. On a certain autumn day, Chaoyang City was talking about the high monk of the White Tower Temple releasing animals. Ning Ke heard that after several buckets of loaches and various fish were thrown into the lake, there would be a very funny and bloody scene. He thought it was very interesting and wanted to take Sang Sang to see it. She was a little tired and did not want to leave the hospital, so she went by herself. The release was indeed very lively. Those loaches, eels, and various fishes killed each other, and it was really bloody. What those eminent monks did was really funny. Ning Ke was about to go home after watching it, when he suddenly had a strange feeling. Looking at the lake and the White Tower on the other side of the lake, he always felt that something was missing. The dense crowd of believers and tourists gradually dispersed. As the dusk deepened, the White Tower Temple gradually became quiet. He stood on the shore and looked at the tower in silence. That feeling was still lingering. At this moment, the bell for the evening class rang in the temple. This bell rang in his heart at the same time. The Buddhist bell could clear the heart and help believers meditate. Ning Ke had the fragments of lotus consciousness deep in his sense of perception, so he could naturally sense it more clearly. He subconsciously walked to the depths of the temple. Following the bell, he came to the front of the main hall of the White Tower Temple. He saw hundreds of monks chanting devoutly inside the threshold. With the chanting, the statue of Buddha in the hall seemed more and more merciful. Buddha was quietly looking at him. When the chanting entered his ears, it was the sound of Buddha. It was extremely beautiful. Ning Ke stood outside the threshold and gradually became obsessed. In the small courtyard, Sang Sang woke up. The black crow on the branch cawed strangely and flew away. Her eyes followed the black crow and fell on the sky. She felt that the sky was a little familiar and very beautiful. She looked at it for a long time and gradually became obsessed. Obsession arose from love. There was no wise man in love. Love did not know why. Obsession was stupidity. It is said that it is a supermoon today. The headmaster must be in a very good state, but I am in a very bad state. It is not because I am tired of writing 5 chapters yesterday, but because I plucked up the courage to eat a fish hot pot tonight. I am a little anxious and always feel that some joints are aching. Of course, I know this is not true. I am not as stupid as Ning Ke and Sang Sang, but I am timid. And with the 2,000 words today, I just finished writing greed, anger, and obsession. It feels like I have completed a very difficult task. I relaxed and found it hard to lift my spirits. Today is only 2,000 words. I will write slowly, but I don't know if I can finish it. In order to avoid wasting time, I will tell you in advance that even if I finish it, I will publish it tomorrow. Do you think it is possible for me to write some drafts? It seems difficult. Tomorrow will definitely continue. I have fallen in love with the rhythm of 15-15. Maybe it is because I have said it too much when I was a child. But I will never do something like 15-15. There will be 5 chapters tomorrow. It happens to be Monday, so I sincerely ask for recommendation votes. Student Yunkai asked me to write a single chapter to get votes. I have been thinking about it. It is not easy to endure for dozens of days. Although it is really painful to endure, should I endure it? Maybe I can't endure it tomorrow or the day after. Then we will talk about it. Thank you for your support. I am still full of energy and the quality of the article is good. Please vote for me. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 955. A monk walked out of the hall. The monk was not very old. His face was dark, and he was slightly plump. The distance between his eyes was a little far, and he looked a little silly, or perhaps naive. However, his eyes were extremely clear. The monk was holding a white and fat steamed bun in his hand and chewing it all the way. His face was full of joy. He didn't see the road clearly and bumped into Ning Quebec. Ouch. The monk rubbed his head and brushed his fingers over the scars. His left hand was still holding the steamed bun so tightly that his fingers sank into the white and soft bun. His eyes were full of tears. It seemed that he was really in pain. The monk bumped into him because he didn't see the road clearly. It had nothing to do with Ning Quebec. But somehow, Ning Ke felt pity for the monk and apologized gently. The monk looked at Ning Ke's face and was suddenly stunned. He forgot the pain and suddenly became happy. He put the steamed bun in front of Ning Ke and said with a smile, "My treat." Ning Ke was surprised and asked, "Why do you want to treat me?" The monk said, "Because you look like me. My master said that I am a good person, so you are also a good person." Ning Ke looked at his silly face and thought, "How do I look like you?" He asked, "Who are you?" The monk answered honestly, "My name is King Banzi." Ning Ke looked at his expression and tone and knew that his mind was probably not fully developed. So he asked casually, "Where do you come from, King Banzi?" Monk Qingban refused to answer. He raised the steamed bun higher and almost touched Ning Ke's mouth. Ning Ke understood and took the steamed bun from his hand and took a bite. Monk Qingban clapped his hands happily and took Ning Ke's hand to a certain place on the temple wall. He pointed at the moss-covered stone steps outside a side door and said, "I come from here." Ning Ke looked at the stone steps and vaguely understood that this person was probably an abandoned baby who was abandoned by his relatives and thrown on the stone steps outside the White Tower Temple. Then he was taken in by the monks in the temple and grew up like this. "Why do you say that I look like you?" he asked curiously. Monk Qingban pursed his lips and said shyly, "My master said that I am an idiot with innate wisdom. My brothers in the temple also said that I am an idiot. You looked like an idiot before, so of course you have the innate wisdom." Ning Ke thought that the eminent monk Lotus was in his consciousness, so of course he had the innate wisdom. But, the monks in the temple said that Qingban was an idiot. What did it have to do with innate wisdom? Monk Qingban was so naive and naive. Ning Ke naturally wouldn't say these things to add to his worries. So he let the monk hold his hand and wander in the temple. The bell in the temple rang far away, and Ning Ke gradually calmed down. The strange feeling he had when he saw the White Tower and the water shadow by the lake gradually disappeared, which made him feel very comfortable. In the meditation room of the side hall of the temple, Monk Qingban took out more than 300 Buddhist scriptures left by his master and showed them to Ning Ke, just like a child showing off his treasures to his friends. Ning Ke didn't want to disappoint him, so he picked up a Buddhist scripture and began to read it. He praised it from time to time. Monk Qingban was scratching his ears and cheeks with joy. There was a true meaning in the scripture. Ning Ke just praised it casually. But after reading it, he found it was really interesting. He gradually immersed himself in it and forgot to go back. When he woke up, it was already late at night. He felt very uneasy and quickly got up. He woke up Monk Qingban, who had fallen asleep on the futon, and left the White Tower Temple and walked back to the small courtyard. The reason why he felt uneasy was that he was so greedy for Buddhist scriptures that he forgot to cook dinner. Now the most important thing for Sang Sang was to eat and sleep. What would she think of him? Sang Sang was not in the small courtyard, but under a tree by the stream outside. Hearing Ning Ke's footsteps, she didn't turn around to look at him. Instead, she continued to look at the sky, and the small white flower in her hair trembled in the night wind. Ning Ke walked to her side and expressed his sincerest apologies for forgetting to cook dinner today. Sang Sang was in a good mood because she had been looking at the sky for a whole day. The sky was so beautiful that she had long forgotten to eat, so she showed her tolerance to Ning Quebec. That night, after dinner in the courtyard, Ning Ke talked about what he had seen and heard in the White Tower Temple today. He mentioned the silly monk Qingban and said, "Would you like to go with me tomorrow? It's always good to have some new friends." Sang Sang said like an ordinary housewife, but she didn't agree to go with him to the White Tower Temple tomorrow. She wanted to stay in the courtyard and look at the sky. The sky was so beautiful that she couldn't get enough of it. In the following days, apart from accompanying her to wander around the city, Ning Ke spent most of his time in the White Tower Temple. He talked with monk Qingban, listened to the bell and read the Buddhist scriptures, and felt quite peaceful. Sometimes he would bring back some vegetarian food for Sang Sang to eat, but Sang Sang did not like it. Sang Sang was still sleepy. When she woke up, she would look at the sky from morning to dusk. Under the tree and by the stream, she quietly looked at the sky. She felt that the sky was beautiful, but also a little strange. One day, Ning Ke said that she could also look at the sky in the White Tower Temple. Sang Sang thought it was very reasonable, so she followed him to the White Tower Temple. Although she didn't like the vegetarian food and the monks in the temple, she thought that the lake was very beautiful, and the sky reflected in the lake was also very beautiful. So she began to sit by the lake and look at the sky. The days went on like this. Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at the lake, the sky, and the Buddhist scriptures in the morning bell and the evening drum. They were calm and happy. Time passed slowly, and gradually they didn't know how long they had been. The bright bell reverberated among the peaks and in hundreds of temples, waking up many monks. Compared with the melodious and distant bell in the Xiankong Temple in the past, today's bell seemed so strong and even a little anxious, because it was a warning. The bell transmitted countless messages and also pointed out the direction. More than 100 soldier monks walked out of the Yellow Temple on the west peak and rushed down the peak. They changed horses at the foot of the mountain and turned into a cloud of dust, riding along the mountain road to somewhere in the dark underground field at high speed. Their monk robes fluttered in the wind, and their momentum was shocking. The vast underground field had always seemed so quiet in the past countless years. But today, somewhere in the field, the sound of killing had already shaken the sky. Smoke and dust were everywhere, and the sound of shouting and the sound of weapons colliding could be heard everywhere. Among them, there were also the sad chanting of scriptures, which was very strange. The former Buddhist land had become a battlefield, and the once devout believers had already become bloodthirsty Asuras. However, if killing was a sin, in fact, this place had always been a Shiraba. More than 100 soldier monks came to the periphery of the bloody battlefield with iron sticks in their hands and slowly stopped. Their horses gradually parted, and 4 monks wearing bamboo hats came out. The leading monk had a plain face and a determined expression. Even the shadow of the bamboo hat could not hide the tranquility in his eyes. He was Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of Buddhism. The other 3 monks wearing bamboo hats looked very old, and they were all the elders of the commandment hall of the Xiankong Temple. Qi Nian quietly looked at the battlefield, but his eyes passed through the smoke and dust raised by the hooves of the horses and fell on the cliff far away. There were people on the cliff, and he was responsible for the world under the cliff. The nobles of dozens of tribes were armed and united. After dozens of days of desperate fighting, they finally stopped the slaves in front of the meadow beside the abandoned gold field. The Xiankong Temple had also sent powerful soldier monks and strong cultivators. Logically speaking, the outcome of the war had already been decided. But Qi Nian still felt a little uneasy, because he always felt that that person would not admit defeat so easily. The rebellion of the serfs in the underground field had lasted for a year. In the beginning, the rebellion was just a riot of shepherds of a poor tribe by the cliff, and more than a dozen people were killed. The tribe tried to suppress it by force, and even invited a monk who was punished by the commandment hall to the holy mountain. Unexpectedly, the armed forces of the nobles of the tribe were all killed in the suppression, and the monk did not survive. The Xiankong temple still did not care much. They had ruled the underground world for countless generations, and the monks in the temple had long been used to it. Every few years, there would be descendants of sinners who would forget the mercy of the Buddha, and ungratefully try to get treatment that they were not qualified to get. But no matter how fierce the sinners were at the beginning, in the end, they only needed to send a few monks to suppress them, and they could also prove to the believers how powerful the holy mountain was. So why not? But the serfs' rebellion this time was very different from the countless rebellions in the past. The nobles gathered 200 cavalrymen to suppress the sinners made up of more than 100 sick and weak shepherds, but they still did not succeed. So they gathered more troops, but they still did not succeed. In the end, the nobles sent 1,000 cavalrymen, and even invited professional slave hunters, but they still did not succeed. The encirclement and suppression of the rebels never stopped, but not only did they not succeed, but the ranks of the rebels grew larger and larger, and several wandering ascetic monks died in the battle. News of this rebel army began to spread in the underground world, along with the legend that the rebel army had found the way to the true Elysium. Their innate desire for freedom and their innate hatred for suffering and inequality caused the rebel army to gain more and more sympathizers, and some even began to respond to them. Similar to the rebellion of the Cliffside tribe, the rebellions of other tribes in the underground world were often initiated by shepherds. Those who lived between heaven and earth for generations, accompanied by cattle and sheep, and were relatively free to migrate, had the strongest desire for freedom and the firmest resistance against exploitation. More and more people joined the rebellion, and the wilderness of the underground world became more and more chaotic. The order that had been maintained in the Buddhist kingdom for thousands of years began to be threatened, especially as more wandering ascetic monks were killed by the rebels. The Xiankong temple could no longer watch calmly as before. The monks of the Xiankong temple were practitioners, and for the serfs in the underground world, they were the living Buddhas who used to worship. Whether in terms of spirit or strength, the appearance of these monks was the most fatal blow to the rebellious serfs. In a very short time, most of the rebellions in the underground world were suppressed. However, some things were difficult to end once they started, some ideas were difficult to extinguish once they were born, and some bonfires were difficult to extinguish once they were lit. The fire of rebellion in the meadow seemed to be about to be extinguished, but who knew how many sparks were hidden under the weeds? A few months later, dozens of rebellions of various sizes occurred in the underground world. After suppressing one, the monks of the Xiankong temple had to rush to another. What made them tired and helpless was that every time they finished suppressing a rebellion, a new one would occur. A single spark could start a prairie fire. Something happened and affected me. I must finish the 5 chapters today, but please understand that I don't have the time and energy to revise it. It may be rough. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 956. The rebellion spread like wildfire and had affected nearly 1/3 of the tribes. The rebel army, which started the rebellion and was also the strongest now, had more than 4,000 people. This rebel army was so strong that it took them a whole year to fight from the remote cliff to a place less than 200 miles away from the giant peak. Although the foundation of the Buddha kingdom seemed to be not really shaken, the Xiankong temple had already felt a strong sense of danger. The monks could not allow the rebels to climb up to the divine mountain. Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, was also a super powerful person in the Xiankong temple. Since the rebellion became more and more popular, he had been guarding the mountain path that people had to pass through to reach the peak. He was like someone who was guarding the pass in front of the verdant canyon. However, as the rebel army approached, he could no longer sit still. Qi Nian knew the biggest difference between this rebellion and the countless rebellions in the past years. In the past, the rebellion in the underground world was only the instinctive anger of the serfs. But in this rebellion, the serfs were very clear about what they wanted. That was why they were so determined and brave. Someone brought hope to the serfs and pointed them a clear direction. At the same time, that person stood with the serfs and always rushed to the front on the battlefield. Thinking of that person's name, Qi Nian's expression became serious, and his eyes under the shadow of the bamboo hat became more determined. It was because he knew that that person was in the rebel army that he left the peak and came to this battlefield. He knew that the 3 elders of the commandment hall might not be able to stop that person. Facing that person, no matter how cautious the Xiankong temple was, it was not an exaggeration. Qi Nian was even sure that if the chief monk was not indifferent on the cliff plateau, he would definitely take action himself. In the distant battlefield full of smoke and dust, the wildest sounds of fighting burst out. Qi Nian woke up from his meditation and looked at that place in silence. He knew that today's battle was about to end. As dusk came, several tribes lost nearly 1,000 people to stop the rebellious slaves at the other end of the meadow. Howls and groans could be heard everywhere in the wilderness. The battle temporarily stopped. Qi Nian and the other monks looked at the distant meadow with mixed feelings. In the camp of the rebellious serfs, there were a dozen very simple tents. The old people were treating the injured young people. There was smoke rising from the side of the tents. There was a big pot on the fire. They should be cooking mutton. In front of the tent in the middle, many people could be seen sitting there, as if they were listening to someone. The night in the underground world was longer than in the temples on the peak. Compared to the real world on the ground, it was even longer and a little tiresome. But Qi Nian was not tired. He stood quietly in the wilderness until the stars disappeared and the morning light shone again. Then he led the monks to the battlefield. More than a dozen nobles in luxurious clothes knelt on the meadow. They looked excited and awestruck. They did not dare to look up. For them, those who came down from the divine mountain were real Buddhas. The cavalrymen had already woken up. They were washing and eating with the help of the slaves. Voices also came from the camp of the rebels in the distance. There were no slaves there, but there were old people, women, and children. This rebel army had fought from the edge of the cliff all the way to the front of the peak. They had always brought the old, the sick, the disabled and the orphans of their own clan. From a military point of view, it was stupid and also very daunting. Qi Nian walked to the front. The nobles kept kissing the footprints left by him with devout fanaticism. He did not pay attention to them and quietly looked at the distant meadow. The elder of the commandment hall standing on his right looked at the meadow in the morning light and the slaves in shabby clothes who looked happy. He did not know why he suddenly felt extremely angry. All the sinners will go to hell. Following this cruel verdict, the fierce battle began once again. Thousands of cavalrymen gathered by several large tribes charged towards the rebel army. The cavalrymen on horseback brandished their snow-white scimitars and shouted obscenities. Their bloodshot eyes were filled with cruelty. The equipment of the tribal cavalrymen was naturally many times better than those of the rebel serfs. Especially the more than 200 cavalrymen in the front, they were fully armored, which formed a sharp contrast with the enemy. The sound of hooves was like a storm, and the blades were as bright as the sun. The tribal cavalrymen rushed to the wilderness hundreds of feet away from the serfs. Their battle cries seemed to shake the sky. A rain of arrows fell. With the eyesight of the monks of the Xiankong temple, they could clearly see that there were only dozens of archers in the rebel serfs. And the bows and arrows in their hands were so simple. Some of the arrows did not even have tail feathers. Who could be hit by such arrows? Even if they could, how could they pierce through the armor? The elder of the commandment hall showed a look of pity on his face. This kind of pity was naturally sarcasm. However, Qin Yan still looked serious. He had better eyesight and clearly saw that those arrows did not have arrowheads, but prismatic stones tied to them. Suddenly, a gust of wind rose above the meadow. The wind was a bit strange, because it was not unpredictable like the wind in nature. Instead, it blew straight to the tribal cavalryman as if it had been ordered. The arrows without tail feathers could also fly in such a violent wind. They did not need to be accurate. They became faster and faster in the wind, and even became whistling arrow shadows. Bang, 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 bang. Dozens of dull sounds of impact sounded almost at the same time. The tribal cavalrymen in the front were like weeds cut by a sickle. They fell to the ground. Those cavalrymen who fell to the ground rolled in pain and kept spitting blood from their mouths. They could not get up. The next moment, they closed their eyes unwillingly. There was a clear dent on the armor of the dead cavalryman. The rebellious serfs were short of food and clothing, and had no resources to make sharp arrowheads. Even with the help of the gust of wind, the arrows could not pierce through their armor. However, the arrows of the serfs were tied to stones. With the help of the wind, the stones fell on the armors like hammers, directly shattering the internal organs of the cavalrymen. The arrows and stones caused heavy casualties. However, there were too many of the tribal cavalrymen. The momentum of the charge was only slightly hindered, and then they continued to rush forward. Suddenly, the meadow was filled with the sound of fighting. This was a very asymmetrical battle. The tribal cavalrymen wore iron or leather armors and held sharp knives in their hands, while the serfs were dressed in rags. They were dark and thin, and their weapons were very simple. Most of them held bamboo spears, and a few serfs even held bones. Judging from the freshness of the bones, they were probably the leg bones from yesterday's pot. Equipment was indeed important in a battle, but the most important thing was always the people. The serfs had no armor or sharp knives, but they had courage, desire, and bones. Seeing the cavalrymen rushing over like iron, the serfs' faces turned pale, but they did not retreat. They raised the bamboo spears in their hands, and even though their hands were trembling like sieves, no one put them down and ran away. Puchi. The seemingly fragile bamboo spears pierced through the seemingly hard armors. Crack. The bamboo spears were broken by the huge impact of the cavalrymen. The serfs, whose hands had been shaken to the point of bleeding, screamed wildly and devoured the cavalrymen. The same scene happened everywhere around the meadow. The seemingly insufferably arrogant cavalrymen fell one after another in front of the seemingly vulnerable serfs, and were then piled to death. The cavalrymen lost their advantage in speed, and the serfs began to take advantage of their numbers. They picked up stones and brandished bones, frantically surrounded the nearest cavalrymen, and then began to smash them. They used rocks to smash the cavalry's chest armor until it was deformed, and they smashed the cavalry's head until it was deformed. They used the bone clubs in their hands to knock the cavalry unconscious, and then they smashed the other party's leg bones. The cavalry woke up from the pain again, waving the sabers in his hands randomly, and was finally smashed to death. Blood was splashed everywhere on the meadow, and the sound of broken bones and legs could be heard everywhere. The serfs were like beasts, screaming and smashing incessantly. They had lived in this gloomy wilderness for generations. They had been enslaved by the nobles and gurus. They had been smashed to death by these people with stones, and their bones and marrow were sucked out by these people. Today, it was finally their turn to smash these people to death, and it was their turn to smash these people's bones. Buddha had always talked about samsara, the cycle of cause and effect, and retribution to his disciples and believers. So this was retribution, this was cause and effect, and this was samsara. Looking at the bloody and tragic scene on the battlefield, and seeing the tribe getting more and more unfavorable situation, the eyes of the elder of the commandment hall no longer showed compassion, but only anger and coldness. Qi Nian was silent for a moment, and then said, "Buddha is merciful. Buddha is merciful." More than 100 soldier monks from the west peak of the Xiankong temple put their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. There was no mercy in their voice, only indifference and determination. Accompanied by the chanting of Buddha, the soldier monks stabbed the iron sticks in their hands into the wilderness. It was as if a thunder had exploded in the wilderness. A strong force came from the bottom of the dense iron sticks and spread to the meadow. The wilderness was shaking, as if there was a Vajra walking under the ground. More than a dozen serfs were shaken into the air and then fell heavily to the ground. They were shocked to death. Buddha is merciful. The soldier monks chanted the name of Buddha again, pulled out the iron sticks from the wilderness, and rushed to the battlefield. For a moment, the shadows of the sticks were everywhere, and the monk robes were fluttering in the wind. It was indescribably solemn. The rebellious serfs who had once suddenly heard the name of Buddha and looked at the soldier monks. Their faces became very pale, and their eyes were filled with fear. For them, the soldier monks from the divine mountain were the living Buddhas. They were mortals, how could they fight against the living Buddhas? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the tent in the middle of the meadow. It seemed to be chanting scriptures. Hearing the voice, the serfs suddenly became determined. They held the iron knives and bamboo spears, and waved the bone sticks that were full of knife marks, and rushed to the soldier monks. The soldier monks were chanting the name of Buddha, and the name of Buddha was like thunder. The serfs were also chanting the name of Buddha. They were repeating the name of the person in the tent. The name of Buddha was very short, and they were very familiar with it. Each word was a sentence, and each word was sonorous and powerful, like real thunder. The second chapter, and with the help of the bone stick in this chapter, I recommend a Korean movie that I like very much, Yellow Sea. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 957. The scripture was really short, only one sentence. The way the serfs recited the scripture was also very special, treating each word as a sentence. They would resolutely shout out the first word, and then be silent. When they thought there was no more, they would shout in unison again. The thunder in the sky did the same. Hundreds of monk soldiers chanted the 4 words of Buddha's mercy. Their monk robes fluttered in the wind. Their Zen hearts were firm, but there was no mercy in their eyes. Instead, they were full of anger. Thousands of serfs chanted the scripture together and resisted the power of the Buddha's name. They regained their courage and waved the simple weapons in their hands to attack the monk soldiers. With the sound of the Buddha's name, the monk soldiers descended to the human world like Buddha. The chanting was like thunder, and the mortals were like ghosts coming out of hell. The field was stained with blood, and the battle was extremely fierce. The nobles who were watching the battle were pale. They didn't expect that these untouchables could fight so fiercely with the living Buddha from the divine mountain. The elders of the commandment hall couldn't understand why these sinners had the courage to resist the power of the Buddha's words. Looking at the world of the bloody sea in front of them, they seemed to see countless evil ghosts and asuras. Qi Nian looked extremely solemn. He had been listening to the scripture that the serfs shouted out. After a long time, he finally understood that it was not scripture at all, but a sentence. Warrior. No. Can. E. No. Hong. E. It was a simple sentence with only 7 words. But the meaning of the sentence was profound enough to be remembered for 700 years. The power of the sentence was so great that it easily crushed the Buddha's words into pieces. The nobles couldn't understand it, the elders of the commandment hall couldn't understand it, and neither could Qin Yen. But he remembered one thing. He once heard from the dead Qi Mei that in front of the White Tower Temple, Mr. First of the Academy used only one sentence to break the Buddha's words of the chief preaching monk. At that time, Mr. First said, "The Master does not speak of supernatural powers and gods." At this time, Qin Yen naturally thought of the past. Could it be that the sentence that the sinners were shouting was also said by the headmaster? Even so, how could that person's Tao reach such a level? He was wrong. The words that reverberated in the wilderness and brought courage and perseverance to the serfs were not spoken by the headmaster, but by that person. These words were not said by Confucius, but were the requirements that that person had for himself, the expectations that he had for all living beings. These words contained the spirit of his life, and when 1,000 people shouted together, it was like thunder. A scholar must be resolute. At this time, the ordinary people who were fighting on the battlefield had been slaves for generations. They were not warriors, but when they said these words, they became warriors, they became noble people. Thus, they gained morale. The serfs charged towards the remaining soldiers and the living Buddha in their hearts. Their voices were like thunder. In the Buddhist scriptures, Buddha once explained the thunder in the sky as the friction or collision between clouds and the sky. In today's battlefield, the thunder was the collision between iron and iron. As the dust drifted in the meadow, an iron sword suddenly appeared. This iron sword was very straight. There was no existence in the world that could be straighter. This iron sword was very thick, so thick that it didn't seem like a sword, but more like a piece of stubborn iron. The iron sword whistled through the air and slashed down. A soldier monk raised his iron cudgel to meet the sword. With a thunderous sound, the iron cudgel suddenly shattered, and the soldier monk fell to the ground, spitting out blood. His body made countless crisp cracking sounds, and he died just like that. 10 iron cudgel broke through the air and pressed towards the iron sword like a group of mountains. The iron sword proudly lifted up. It was still only one sword, and there was only a thunderous sound. The 10 iron cudgel were like 10 pieces of straw, deformed and scattered in all directions, disappearing into the wild grass. The 10 soldier monk holding the iron cudgel were shaken away to some unknown place. There was a loud roar in the meadow. The leader of the soldier monk opened his mouth, showing his teeth and eyes, like a lion in front of the Buddha. He gathered countless chi of heaven and earth on the iron cudgel, and smashed it towards the iron sword. At this moment, a hand reached out from the dust and grabbed the hilt of the iron sword. The fingers of this hand were very slender, and the palm was very thick. Holding the iron sword, there was an indescribable sense of harmony. If this sense of harmony had to be described, it would probably be completely natural. A figure vaguely appeared in the dust. That person held the iron sword, and with a casual wave, he blocked the iron cudgel of the leader of the soldier monk that was smashing down with countless chi of heaven and earth. The iron sword and iron cudgel collided, and there were sparks, thunder, and a moment of silence. The leader of the soldier monk felt a terrifying power coming from the iron cudgel. The first impression of the power was that it was very violent, but on a deeper level, it was calm and orderly. He knew that he was no match for this level of power, and he would definitely be defeated. But as a top swordsman of the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple, he thought that he had to block the iron sword for a moment, and he could not let down the dignity of the Buddhism sect. Therefore, he refused to let go of the iron cudgel and held it tightly. In the eyes of the bystanders, the iron sword just touched the monk's iron cudgel and then left. The figure in the dust ignored the leader of the soldier monk, and walked calmly past him. Boom, 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 boom. It was not until then that the real thunder exploded in the body of the leader of the soldier monk. His fingers were all broken into pieces, his wrist was broken into 2 pieces, and then his arm, the 2 arms of the leader of the soldier monk that were holding the iron cudgel were directly shattered into 2 pieces of flesh and blood by the iron sword, and then disappeared with the dust in the wilderness. With a miserable scream, the leader of the soldier monk knelt on the ground in pain. His face was extremely pale, and he wanted to hit his head to relieve the pain, but it was already impossible. The dust gradually settled, and the figure gradually appeared in front of everyone. His hair was very short, and the sharp stubble was like a forest of swords in the academy, facing the high and cold sky. His right arm was broken, but there was no wrinkle on the gently swinging sleeve. He wore a khaki frock, which had not been washed for a year, and was full of dust and blood at this moment, very dirty. But his expression was as if he was wearing a luxurious robe to participate in an ancient sacrificial ceremony. His expression was still calm and proud. His face was smeared with blood, his frock was stained with blood, and the iron sword in his left hand was dripping with blood. He was covered in blood. Judging from his appearance, he was just an ordinary monk. But when he walked out of the bloody battlefield, he was like a blood Buddha walking out of hell. There was a dead silence in the wilderness. Qi Nian and the elders of the commandment hall looked at the proudest and most terrifying Mr. Second in the back of the mountain of the academy, and thought of all the people he had killed in the underground world this year. They sighed and said, "Buddha is merciful." He said, "Buddha is pitiful." Qi Nian put his palms together and said, "That year in front of the verdant canyon, you fought against thousands of soldiers. But this is not the verdant canyon, but the Buddha land. Without the help of the academy, you have no chance of winning even if you fight until the end of time." He said, "A scholar is a gentleman, and a scholar must be resolute. The responsibility is heavy, and the road is long. Isn't it also heavy to be benevolent? Isn't it also long after death?" Qi Nian said, "You don't know the way, how about it?" He looked at the monks in front of him and said expressionlessly, "My name is Jun Mo. I have been taught by the teacher, and I only wish to be a gentleman in this life. Those who dare to stop me will die without a burial place." The 3rd chapter, this chapter is 2000. I was a bit confused just now, so I finished the 2nd chapter at 10:30, but I forgot to publish it. I will try to finish the 4th chapter before 2:00. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 958. Looking at Jun Mo's empty sleeve, Qi Nian said, "Your arm was cut off by Lu Bai, which means that you are stuck in the mortal world. What you need most now is the mercy of Buddha. That's why you left Chang'an and came here. In that case, why do you still resist? Why don't you really convert to Buddha?" Jun Mo looked at the mountain in front of the field. The mountain was only 200 miles away, which was very close, so it looked even more majestic. He slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, "How do I convert?" Qi Nian looked at the bleeding iron sword in his hand and said, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. There are statues of Buddha, skeletons, gold-cast instruments, and silver-inlaid skulls. Monks have prayer beads on their necks, and nobles have ears on their necks. This is not the Buddha kingdom, but hell. There are no living Buddhas here, only evil ghosts." Jun Mo withdrew his gaze and looked at him expressionlessly. "If I really want to become a Buddha, how can I not kill all of you evil ghosts? Since I want to kill you, how can I put down the butcher's knife? In the mortal world, maybe you can put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. But here, picking up the butcher's knife is the way to become a Buddha." Qi Nian was silent for a long time. Then he looked at the ragged serfs and said, "Do do you really think that you can take these people away by yourself? Junemo said, I wanted to take these people to build a road to the ground. Although the cliff is high, it can be built if we keep building it for generations. But now I feel that time is a little tight, so I changed the way. Since we can't get out, I will take them to the mountain to see the scenery. There were many mountains in the underground world, but there was only one real mountain, which was the Prajna mountain. At this time, it was reflecting the morning light in front of everyone's eyes, shining brightly. That mountain was the remains of Gautama Buddha. What Junemo had to do was to take the millions of serfs in the underground world to behave wildly on the remains of Gautama Buddha and enjoy the sunshine and warmth. Qi Nian slightly raised his eyebrows and looked angry. He shouted, Don't deceive yourself. How can you do it alone? Junemo stood in front of thousands of serfs and shouted, Open your eyes. See how many people there are. Qi Nian was so angry that he laughed and said, Do you expect to rely on these people to mess up the Buddha kingdom? Don't forget, these fools are like ants. How can they fly? Junemo said coldly, More than 20 years ago, you once said in the wilderness that there were flying ants that listened to the chief monk's sermon and flew away while bathing in the light. Now you even want to erase your own ideas? Qi Nian's chest tightened, and his Zen heart was suddenly disturbed. He said, These people are guilty, so they are stupid. Junemo said, Do you know why Buddha set up a commandment that forbade the monks in the temple from teaching them words and knowledge, let alone teaching them the Dharma? Qi Nian was silent, because none of the eminent monks of the past generations, including him, could figure out this problem. It was understandable that they did not pass on the written knowledge, but wouldn't it make the sinners more pious to cultivate Buddhism? Qi Nian, your faith is not as strong as you think. There are millions of serfs in the underground world. Any old woman would be 100 times better than you in this aspect. Junemo shouted, Because you are literate, and because you cultivate Buddhism. Cultivation is always a matter of doubt. If you don't doubt, you don't cultivate. Therefore, cultivators will eventually doubt the Tao, and cultivators of Buddhism will naturally doubt the Buddha. Qi Nian's face was pale, and the back of his robe was wet with sweat. He gradually felt uneasy. Junemo looked into his eyes and said, Buddha knew very well that only the truly stupid people would have the real firm faith. Therefore, he did not allow you disciples to teach the Dharma to the people in the underground world. He wanted these people to be stupid. Only in this way could he create the Western Nirvana, and then he was so confident that he dared to trap Haotian. You said these people are guilty, so they are stupid? Bullshit. Their stupidity is the sin of your Buddha. Qi Nian wanted to say something, but Junemo did not give him a chance. He continued, Besides, Buddha forbade you from teaching them Dharma knowledge because he was afraid. If everyone woke up and became Buddha, how could he maintain this evil nirvana? You bald donkeys, if you don't teach them words and Buddhist scriptures, they will naturally be stupid. Now I teach them words and wake them up. What I want to dig out is your foundation, and what I want to destroy is this Buddha land. I'd like to see how you can stop me. There were thousands of serfs standing behind Junemo. It seemed that they had not changed much from before. They were still ragged and dirty, and some of them even looked hungry. But if you looked closely, you would find that their eyes were still calm, not as numb as before. They became lively. The eyes of human beings were used to see and find freedom. Only then would they be lively, as if they were alive. That was the real life. During the year of the serfs' rebellion, apart from fighting everywhere and hiding from encirclement and suppression, the thing they spent the most time on was learning. At the beginning, Junemo taught the herdsmen of the tribe on the cliff to read. Then the herdsmen became teachers and taught other companions to read. They had never been in contact with knowledge or civilization. Once they started to learn, they became so hungry and began to grow at an unimaginable speed. Looking at the serf's eyes, Seventh Yi knew that Jun Mo was not lying. Thinking of Jun Mo's efforts and spirit in the process, he could not understand. He asked, "Why do you have such great malice against the Buddhism sect and the Buddha?" If he did not have great malice, he would not have made such a great effort. Why? Because all of you are evil. Jun Mo said, "I hate monks and Buddhist temples the most. In the human world, you do not produce, but specialize in cheating the poor of gold and silver. It is even more so here. How abominable it is. How can I not hate it? Of course, what the priests of Haotian Taoism do is no different from what you do." Seventh Yi silently thought that the Buddhism sect's shortcomings were also worse than Haotian Taoism's. Since you know this, why do you hate the Buddhism sect more? Because Haotian Taoism has never hidden their purpose. The priests of the West Hill Divine Palace want to rule the world. They want power and wealth to satisfy all kinds of desires. Even if they pretend to be benevolent and loving, they do it very casually and can no longer deceive more people. Jun Mo said, "The Buddhism sect is different. Your pretense is higher, your acting is better, your memorial archway is bigger, and your deceptions are deeper. I find it even more unpleasant." Seventh Yi said, "Is this the difference between a real villain and a hypocrite? It is the difference between a robber and a thief." Jun Mo's words directly reduced the noble Buddhism sect and Taoism sect to dust. Then he looked at the serfs around him and said, "Of course, here you have both." Seventh Yi said, "My sect also has countless brothers who cultivate diligently in the world and abide by the precepts. They are not greedy or angry, and they are merciful. Can't you see this?" Jun Mo looked at the giant peak in the distance and laughed, "Abide by the precepts? Your temple is full of thieves and prostitutes, and the mountain is full of illegitimate children. How dare you talk about this?" Seventh Yi said, "Master Xiaofan is the descendant of the former chief preaching monk. What do you think?" Jun Mo said, "Master Xiaofan is truly virtuous, so he left the Xiankong temple when he was young. Do you want to use him to gild the Xiankong temple's Buddha statue? Does the Buddha statue have any shame?" In his opinion, the Buddhism sect was full of hypocritical bald donkeys, just like what Qi Nian had done in the past. With a compassionate face, he deceived the eldest brother's kindness and set up a killing trap in the Lank temple. How shameless! Back then, Jun Mo killed Qi Nian with his iron sword. He first asked if a gentleman could be deceived. Later, he said that a gentleman should play with a square chess. He used the square iron sword in his hand to cut Qi Nian's outer body Dharmakaya. Today, in front of the Xiankong temple, in the Buddha kingdom, he used his words as a sword to cut Qi Nian's face. Why? Because he was in the right. If he was in the right, he could go anywhere in the world, no matter in the alley or the main road. Qi Nian had been practicing silent meditation for nearly 20 years, so he was not good at debating. Jun Mo's words had pierced the deepest part of his Zen heart. How could he say anything? He could not argue. Since he could not argue, he could only fight. Qi Nian stretched out a finger toward Jun Mo on the meadow. His finger broke the autumn wind and seemed to draw a circle casually. Then, a circle appeared behind his head, emitting endless light of Buddha. He retracted his finger and put his palms together in front of his chest. His body also began to emit light of Buddha. As his monk robe fluttered, the lines on the edge of his body strangely expanded into the air and instantly became countless times larger. Another Qi Nian appeared in the field, with a face full of anger. His eyebrows were like swords, and his eyes were full of thunder, as if he could suppress all evil spirits in the world. It was his Dharmakaya, Akalanatha. First, he used the perfect Buddha's will, and then he used his Dharmakaya. But Qi Nian did not stop. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha stretched out its right palm in the air and slightly bent its index finger. It was the mantra Mahamudra of the Buddhism sect. He practiced silent meditation, so he did not need to speak Buddha's words, and the Buddha's words would resound between heaven and earth. In the Buddha's words, the mountain-like Dharmakaya of Akalanatha pressed toward Jun Mo with the Mahamudra. The Mahamudra was still like a mountain. The endless mountains were stacked on top of each other, which was the wonderful meaning of prajna. Qi Nian was indeed a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect, a world wayfarer. His attacks were in the 3 levels of divine sense. Facing such a strong enemy, even Jun Mo gradually became serious. How could he break the 3 levels of divine sense? Just like facing those monk soldiers on the battlefield, Jun Mo used his sword. Still, he only used one sword. This did not mean that Jun Mo looked down on Qi Nian and regarded him as the same level as those monk soldiers. Previously, he only used one sword because one sword was enough. Now, he only used one sword because only one sword was enough. Jun Mo's seemingly simple sword strike actually encompassed all of his cultivation realms. The simplest was the most powerful. The broad and straight iron sword broke the autumn wind and stabbed on the mantra of Akalanatha. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha was like a mountain, and so was the Mahamudra, which cast a large shadow on the field. In contrast, the iron sword in Jun Mo's hand looked like an inconspicuous wooden thorn. The thin wooden thorns stopped the palm that was falling from the sky. The wooden thorn even pierced through the palm. No matter how strong the palm was, once the thin wooden thorn pierced into the palm, it would be painful. The iron sword stabbed into the mantra of Akalanatha. Qi Ye's face was slightly pale, and his palms, which were put together, were bleeding. Chapter 4, I'm going to eat something. I'm too hungry. The next chapter will be later. Don't wait, everyone. Tomorrow will be the same. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 959. No matter what kind of divine sense it was, it would be broken by the sword. It was not because the divine sense was too weak, but because the iron sword was too strong. If the iron sword could break the Dharmakaya of the Akalanatha, it could also break the body. Qi Nian was injured in the first encounter. The 3 elders of Commandment Hall beside him suddenly looked shocked. Their thin chests suddenly swelled up as if they had inhaled a lot of autumn wind. As they breathed, a series of extremely complicated and difficult syllables came out of their lips at a high speed. The whistling sound was very scary. In this way, the elders of Commandment Hall finished chanting the text in a very short time. It was indeed difficult to understand because it was not an ordinary Buddhist scripture, but some kind of incantation. Cultivators had many means, such as talisman and psyche. The powerhouses of the Buddhism sect also had their own special skills, and the art of incantation was one of the most powerful. The incantation that the elders of Commandment Hall were chanting at this time was a wonderful method that countless former eminent monks of Xiankong Temple had practiced after thinking hard. Vairocana Devil Subduing Mantra. The most important thing for the former monks of Xiankong Temple was how to maintain the Buddhist kingdom in the depths of the West Wilderness. After Buddha's nirvana, how should the Buddhism sect deal with the demons with great divine sense come? Buddha had left a lot of legacies in this underground Buddhist kingdom. Not to mention the pear tree that Buddha had personally planted, the rocks that Buddha had personally refined, and the Prajna peak was the remains of Buddha, so they shouldn't be worried. Unfortunately, the monks in the temple didn't know how to use these to deal with the enemy. Because of this, countless eminent monks racked their brains and finally found a way to use the power of the Buddhist kingdom with their collective wisdom. This method was similar to the law of words, but it had lower requirements for the caster. As long as the caster was willing to give up his flesh and longevity, he could borrow the infinite power left by Gautama Buddha from the Buddhist kingdom. This method was the mantra, the Vairocana exorcism mantra. This method was cruel to the spellcaster and always had an ominous bloody taste. Once it was used, it would be extremely powerful. Once the innocent was hurt, there was no way to save them. Therefore, the Xiankong temple had always hidden this method in the commandment yard. Only the 3 elders of the commandment yard could practice it, and only the chief monk of scripture could decide when to use it. Jun Mo's cultivation of sword Tao was world-shocking. Now he was going to shake the foundation of the Buddhist kingdom with the serfs. Naturally, he was the great evil demon that Xiankong temple had been wary of for countless generations. If he didn't use it now, when would he use it? The Vairocana devil subduing mantra rang out. The underground world immediately sensed it. The wind howled in the wilderness and the rocks rolled restlessly. The Prajna peak 200 miles away seemed to tremble slightly. The east peak where the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple was located was even more furious. The yellow temple shone brightly. In a flash, a beam of Buddhist light rose from the east peak to the sky. The Prajna peak was transformed from the body of the Buddha. The Mahavira hall on the peak was the head of the Buddha. The left palm was placed in front of him, facing the sky, which was the cliff plateau where the pear tree was located. The right palm was put together with the Anjali Mudra, which was another wonderful place. The east and west peaks were the left and right shoulders of the Buddha. The Buddha's light soared into the sky, as if there was something on the shoulders of the Buddha. Vajra exorcism pestle. A strong wind blew. The Vajra exorcism pestle flew down from the east peak and smashed towards Jun Mo's head. This demon-subduing pestle had no specific shape, but the Buddhist light field was dozens of feet wide. Even if Jun Mo could avoid it, the majority of the thousands of serfs behind him would be smashed to death by this pestle. Jun Mo's face suddenly turned pale. With a clear roar, his monk robe fluttered, and the iron sword floated in the air in front of him. He no longer held the sword with his left hand, but stretched out his right hand to hold the hilt. His right arm was cut off by Lu Bai in front of the verdant canyon, leaving only an empty sleeve. Holding the hilt with his right hand was like rolling the sword with his sleeve. The power of the iron sword suddenly increased. There was a loud bang. The iron sword and the Vajra exorcism pestle met in the sky above the meadow. Although this Vajra exorcism pestle was not performed by the Buddha himself, it was borrowed by the power of the Buddha by the 3rd elder of the commandment yard. The Vajra exorcism seemed to contain the power of the entire Buddha kingdom. Jun Mo was famous for his swordsmanship. After Lu Bai's death, he was undoubtedly the best in the world. However, his swordsmanship was all in his right hand. After losing his arm, he had no hope of peeping into the way of heaven. Even his state and strength had declined a lot. That was why he came to the Xiankong temple to cultivate Buddhism, hoping to find another way. For a whole year, he did not cultivate Buddhism, so naturally he did not find a second way. However, he went further and further on the original path, and walked more and more firmly. Who said that without the right hand, one could not enter the way of heaven with the sword? Whether it was a left-handed sword or a right-handed sword, it was a sword anyway. As long as his spirit and courage were still there, he could hold the sword with his right hand if he wanted to. Jun Mo's sword was like a country, and even the Buddha kingdom was shattered. The Buddha's light shook, and the Vajra exorcism pestle was broken. It turned into countless golden flowers, falling on the meadow and the stream, as if it was more beautiful than the golden sand flowing out of the abandoned gold field. The 3rd elder of the commandment yard suffered from the backfire of the sutra incantation. His spirit suddenly dimmed, and his face gradually withered. Jun Mo, who had cut the Buddha's exorcism pestle with the iron sword, was naturally not well. He was shaken hundreds of feet away like a flying stone. The weeds under his feet were all crushed, and the golden flowers were flattened. Blood oozed from the corners of his mouth. He finally stopped moving backward. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to meditate. He began to restore his psyche power to heal himself, regardless of the blood flowing from the corners of his mouth. Thousands of serf warriors suddenly separated, and then suddenly gathered together, surrounding him in the deepest part of the crowd. They raised their weapons and stared at the enemy in the distance. They looked vigilant and firm, giving people a feeling that if someone wanted to kill Jun Mo at this time, they must first kill all of these serfs, and not even one of them could be left. Protect the living Buddha. The serf warriors shouted in a hoarse voice, cheering for their companions. Although they were a little uneasy, no one showed panic, and orderly and quickly arranged the camp. What Qi Nian said before was right. Jun Mo had fought against thousands of troops in front of the verdant canyon, and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army could not take a step forward. That was because of the terrain, and it was inseparable from the help of the academy, and it was only for 7 days. Now he led the old, weak and sick serfs to fight for a whole year. They had been fighting hard, and he was already exhausted. He did not know how many times his psyche power would be exhausted. Today he broke the Vairocana devil subduing mantra of the third elder of the commandment yard with the iron sword, and he was also seriously injured. His psyche power was in urgent need of recovery. Fortunately, he was very skilled in cooperating with the serf warriors, or it would be really dangerous. At this time, more than 100 soldier monks were dead or disabled. The third elder of the commandment yard sat cross-legged and adjusted his breath. If they wanted to forcibly break through the desperate defense of the serf warriors and kill Jun Mo, only Qi Nian could do it. Qi Nian looked at the drop of red blood in his palm, and then looked at the people in ragged clothes in the distance. His emotions were very complicated, so complicated that he could not make a decision to fight. The eyes of those serfs were so angry and so hateful. No one knew how terrible the fighting power they would burst out. More importantly, could they defeat the injured Jun Mo? In front of the verdant canyon, Jun Mo's arm was cut off by Lu Bai, and the world sighed because everyone, including the chief monk of scripture and the abbey dean, thought that he would never reach the way of heaven in this life. In recent years, the so-called generation of destiny began to appear in the cultivation world. In the unknown places of one temple, one Taoist temple, one school, and one second floor, there appeared a generation of geniuses, Tang of the Devil's Doctrine, Yi Su of the Haotian Taoism, Mr. First and Mr. Second of the Academy, and Qi Nian of the Buddhism sect. Lu Bai and the Master of Calligraphy were half a generation earlier than them, while Yi Hongyu, Chen Pipi, Ning Ke, Mo Shanshan, Tang Xiaotang, and Long Qing were half a generation later than them. Therefore, they were called the generation of destiny because they had the highest state, the most hope, the most vitality, and the most imagination. Among this generation, it was a fact that the eldest brother of the academy, Li Manman, was the strongest. In the war against the Tang Empire, this gentle scholar showed a wonderful state, which also proved this. Below the eldest brother were Jun Mo, Yi Su, Tang, and Qi Nian. The four of them walked side by side, and no one knew who was a little stronger and who was a little slower. In the Battle of the Verdant Canyon, Jun Mo defeated Yi Su and became the strongest among the four. But soon his arm was cut off by Lu Bai, and he could no longer maintain his position. Qi Nian thought that he could defeat Jun Mo, but it seemed that it was not so. In the long and hard battle in the underground world for a year, Jun Mo became much weaker because he had consumed too much energy. But at the same time, he also became much stronger because his will was tempered to be stronger, so strong that it could even affect the reality. Seeing that Junmo broke the Akalanatha with his sword and cut the Vajra scepter of Buddha, Qin Yen knew that Junmo's state had at least recovered to 90% of his heyday. In terms of sword Taoism, he was even better. How on earth did he do it? Qin Yen was a little confused and hesitated. It was at this moment that he missed the best time to attack. In the distance, the crowd gradually separated, and Junmo came back with the iron sword in his hand. His lips were still overflowing with blood, and his face was still pale. But since he stood up again with the iron sword in his hand, it meant that he had recovered enough psyche power after a short period of meditation. At least he thought that it was enough to defeat Qin Yen. Qin Yen asked himself again, how on earth did he do it? The shock and confusion of the enemy was the source of the confidence of his companions. The serf warriors held up the bamboo spears and bone sticks in their hands and looked at Junmo as if they were looking at an invincible god. Guru is mighty. The living Buddha's power is unparalleled. Hearing these words, Qin Yen thought of the serfs shouting to protect the living Buddha and suddenly laughed. He looked at Junmo and said sarcastically, "You want to destroy the Buddha, but in the end, you still have to use the name of Buddha to drive these ignorant sinners. Don't you think it's ridiculous?" Junmo raised the iron sword, and the fanatical shouting behind him stopped instantly. He carried the iron sword on his back. Although thousands of serfs were a little confused, none of them hesitated. They retreated as fast as they could, taking the important supplies and fled to the depths of the field. Qin Yen looked at the serfs who quickly retreated like the tide. He frowned slightly and was puzzled. Junmo said, "Why is it ridiculous?" Qin Yen said, "If you are the Buddha, do you have to destroy yourself first to destroy the Buddha?" Junmo said, "I am the real Buddha, and your Buddha is the fake Buddha." Qin Yen shouted, "How dare you say such nonsense in front of Buddha?" Junmo straightened the iron sword and said, "If I am the Buddha, he can only be the fake Buddha when Buddha comes to see me." An elder of Commandment Hall heard this and said angrily, "Today I will send you to see Buddha." Junmo ignored him and looked at Qin Yen and said, "Don't you understand?" Qin Yen thought of a possibility and his expression changed slightly. He said, "What on earth do you want to do?" Junmo said, "I took 3,000 soldiers and traveled for 700 miles, just to get you and these old monks to come here." Qin Yen stared at his eyes and said, "Then?" Junmo said, "At this time, there are no more powerful cultivators on the peak. As long as I get through you, I will meet my senior brother on the cliff platform. We will kill the chief monk first and then cut the chessboard. How about that?" Qin Yen's face turned pale and said, "Your goal has always been that chessboard?" Junmo said, "Of course, my junior brother is in the chessboard. How can I not save him?" Qin Yen was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Are you sure you can get through us?" Junmo said, "I didn't know at first, because I was not sure how much of my state I had recovered. Previously, I killed the Wisdom King and broke the Buddhist pestle, so I am very sure that as long as I am not in the peak, you can't stop me." Qin Yen looked at him and said, "Do you know what is in the chessboard?" Junmo looked at him and said, "I said before that even if Buddha is in front of me, I will say that he is the fake Buddha." Qin Yen said, "You want to see Buddha?" Junmo pointed at the Prajna peak and said, "If the mountain doesn't come to me, I will go to the mountain. If Buddha is in the mountain, and he doesn't come to see me, I will go to see him." Qin Yen asked, "Even if you can see Buddha, what can you do?" Junmo said, "To destroy this hellish Buddha land, there is no faster way than to kill Buddha." Anyway, it is the same sword. I have to try. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 960. From the beginning to the end, what Jun Mo wanted to do was to overthrow Xiankong Temple's rule over the underground world. But right now, what he wanted to do most was to go to the cliff plateau and take away the chessboard left by Buddha. Because Ning Ke was now trapped in the chessboard, and he did not know whether he was alive or dead. And because Ning Ke was his younger brother. There were countless temples and unknown Buddhist formations in that majestic mountain, as well as powerhouses of the Buddhism sect like Qi Nian and the Commandment Hall elders. He did not think that he could force his way up. So he led the rebellious serfs to kill in the wilderness and lured Qi Nian and the Commandment Hall elders here. As long as he could get past these 4 people, Jun Mo would be able to go straight to the peak. If he could kill these 4 people along the way, it would naturally be even better. Because regardless of whether he could take away the chessboard or not, exterminating Buddhism had already become the most important part of his life, and it had to continue. Until now, Qi Nian finally understood why the fighting style of the rebellious army had changed so much these days. The marching route was no longer strange, and they bravely rushed to the foot of the peak. They did not care about the strength of the rebellious army. Even if they reached the foot of the peak, they would be annihilated in the end. It turned out that they wanted to scare the tiger in the mountain. They wanted to lure the tiger in the mountain to Pingyang, and what Jun Mo wanted to do was to enter the mountain and take away the chessboard. Looking at the serf rebels retreating like the tide, Qi Nian was silent. He knew that he and the 3 elders of the Commandment Hall might not be able to stop Jun Mo. Through the previous battle, Jun Mo had completely grasped the strength of the 2 sides. He was very confident that he could get past this barrier, or he would not let those who followed him retreat first. If it was in the mountain or on the mountain road, Qi Nian was confident that even if Jun Mo became stronger, he would not be able to step on the stone steps with the help of more than 10,000 monks of Xiankong Temple. But now the wilderness was so open. How could he stop him? Qi Nian's face was pale, but his eyes were calm. He looked at Jun Mo who was walking slowly towards him, and looked at the iron sword in his left hand. He took a deep breath of the slightly cold autumn wind. His monk's robe danced wildly. Because of the sudden autumn wind, he only took a deep breath, and the countless autumn winds between heaven and earth all entered between his lips and began to wash his Buddha heart. With such a Buddha's might, heaven and earth naturally sensed it. Silk-shaped clouds floated in the dark blue sky. Those clouds were pulled even thinner, as though they were sugar threads that could not be pulled no matter how hard one pulled. All the weeds within a 1-mile radius suddenly bent down and fell to the ground, as if they were worshipping, revealing the white bones of humans and beasts, as well as the dust-covered gems, which were rolling in the wind. The stream flowing in the abandoned gold sand field was so shallow and clear, but at this moment, the crazy autumn wind blew out countless ripples, and the mud at the bottom of the stream was suffused with the color of water. Qi Nian opened his lips and started the silent meditation that he had cultivated for 20 years. The Zen Dharma closed his mouth and did not speak. When he opened his mouth, there was no sound. Only a wisp of wind slowly flowed out from between his lips. This wisp of wind was so gentle, so merciful, and there was a faint scent of sandalwood in it. In the endless chill of the autumn wind, he found the gentle feeling of spring wind. This was the ability of silent meditation. The faint scent of sandalwood and the fresh smell of the wind were dependent on each other, but did not mix. The silence of Buddhism was not really silence. Thunder could be heard in the silence. There was a thunder-like Buddha roar in the sandalwood that was slowly sent out by the wisp of wind, just like the heavy rain always accumulated in the thick clouds like cotton. When the thick clouds suddenly dispersed, there was a heavy rain and thunder. The roar of Buddha suppressed Jun Mo in this desolate field, and at the same time informed the monks in the Xiankong Temple among the peaks. Breathing was the most common and the most easily forgotten movement of the human body, so it was natural and fast. In Buddhism, breathing was also a measure of time, which was extremely short. Within a breath, Qi Nian started the great magic power of the Buddhism sect. Who could be faster than him? Jun Mo's sword was faster than breathing, faster than the autumn wind, faster than the heavy rain. In the blink of an eye, it came to Qi Nian's front, in front of his eyes, and in front of his lips. This iron sword seemed to be even faster than the silent sound. Jun Mo's sword came to a foot in front of Qi Nian. Jun Mo's sword was Jun Mo. Qi Nian naturally came to a foot in front of Jun Mo. Starting from Lu Bai, the swordsmanship in the human world had undergone earth-shaking changes. The lonely and invincible sage of sword finally wanted to turn the world upside down and then died. But the true meaning of his swordsmanship was left in the human world, and it began to shine in the hands of many people. The disciples of the sword Garrett, Ning Kai, and Yi Hongyu all had Lu Bai's sword. The one who was most qualified to inherit Lu Bai's swordsmanship and could even go further was, of course, Jun Mo. He was Lu Bai's strongest opponent in swordsmanship in this life, and he was naturally Lu Bai's confidant. Even Sang Sang could not avoid Lu Bai's sword, and could only use her own world to block it. Then how many people could avoid Jun Mo's sword? At least, Qi Nian could not do it. Qi Nian knew that he could not avoid this sword, so he did not think about it from the beginning. He just gently blew at the iron sword. It was still a gentle breeze from the beautiful spring, but it was condensed by the endless autumn wind. It contained the true meaning of Buddhism, the reincarnation of all things withering and rebirth, and it could eliminate all the killing intent in the world. Jun Mo's iron sword could not move forward, because he could not pierce through the cycle of life. The sword could not fall from the front. He turned his wrist, and the iron sword flew away from the breeze as soon as it touched it. It suddenly turned in the air without a trace of autumn wind, and slashed at Qi Nian's neck. The iron sword whistled through the wind, and Qi Nian's eyes suddenly brightened, like the gems on the Buddha statue. He still could not avoid this sword, so he did not avoid it. His right hand, which was put together in front of his chest, came to his face. 3 of his fingers were naturally hanging down, and the other 2 fingers seemed to be touching, as if he was holding an invisible flower, facing the edge of the sword. The iron sword was broad and thick, but it had the intent of sharpness. The invisible flower between Qi Nian's fingers had the sense of tranquility and zen. This flower was not a flower of the human world. Even in the spring wind, it would not invite bees to fall, so the edge of the sword could not fall. The iron sword was gently pinched by Qi Nian's fingers. Jun Mo withdrew the sword. This movement seemed simple, but in fact it represented an extremely shocking state. How many people in the world could walk away from the pinching flower fingers, regardless of illusion and reality? Jun Mo still looked calm. He flicked his right sleeve and took a step forward to the right. The iron sword in his left hand was pushed to the back by the sleeve wind, and then he slapped at Qi Nian's cheek with the back of his hand. A forward sword, a reverse sword. Anyway, it was a sword. Let's see how you can block it. Qi Nian could not block it, so he had to take it head-on. The Buddha's light shone, and the Dharmakaya of Akalanatha appeared in the field again. Then in an instant, it disappeared into his body. Being invisible did not mean that it did not exist. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha was taken back by Qi Nian. From this moment on, it was no longer an external Dharmakaya, but a Dharmakaya. His body was as strong as King Kong. The iron sword fell heavily on Qi Nian's cheek. There was a crisp sound, like a slap in the face. A very clear red mark appeared on Qi Nian's cheek, as if he had been slapped. Then his face swelled at a speed visible to the naked eye. 9 of his strongest teeth were slapped off and shattered into pieces. The pieces spread in his mouth, and blood flowed down from the corner of his lips. Body as the Dharmakaya of Akalanatha, as strong as King Kong? As long as it was not like the chief monk of scripture who had become a Buddha with his body, there was no reason that Junmo's sword could not smash him. Qi Nian felt very painful, and also very humiliated. He was the world wayfarer of Buddhism, and was recognized by the cultivation world as a powerhouse of the destined generation. But today, he was defeated by Junmo in such a contemptuous way. How could he not be humiliated? Because of the pain and humiliation, his Zen heart could not calm down and began to tremble. The corner of his mouth that was overflowing with blood also began to twitch. The breeze that blew out from his lips could not continue and scattered into a ball to protect his face. Although he was very angry, he clearly knew that if he did not protect his most dangerous face, Junmo's next sword was very likely to directly smash his head into pieces. Junmo did not continue to attack, because the three Commandment Hall elders were ready to attack at this time behind Qi Nian. He just wanted to break into the mountain, and did not want to stay here for long. Junmo's blood-colored monk robe fluttered slightly. He stepped on Qi Nian's head with his right foot, forcibly interrupting the second silent meditation that he was preparing, and landed among the three Commandment Hall elders. The three Commandment Hall elders sat in 3 places, forming a triangle. The distance between them was exactly the same, which was the standard number of 3 by 3, which was the number of Buddhism. The elder with the highest cultivation sat in the direction of the foot of the mountain, which was in front of Junmo's path. If Junmo wanted to go up the mountain, he had to pass this person before Qi Nian turned around. It was the iron sword that came to the elder. The Commandment Hall elder looked slightly serious, and the prayer beads in his hand shone and stopped the iron sword. The other 2 elders began to chant scriptures. Junmo reached out to hold the iron sword, and the prayer beads suddenly broke, turning into Buddha beads all over the sky. The Commandment Hall elders shouted in unison. The string of prayer beads instantly exploded, and the Buddha's power shrouded the field. Junmo swept up, stepped on the elder's head, jumped high, and then landed on the ground in the distance. Just like that, he charged forward, completely unreasonable. The divine powers in the Buddha beads all landed on his body. The Commandment Hall elders looked at Junmo, who was rushing forward at a high speed in the field, and saw the fresh blood flowing out of his body. They knew that he must have been seriously injured, and could not help but feel a little shocked. He left just like that without even unleashing a single sword strike. He'd rather get injured than stop and fight a single battle. Was this still the proud and conceited Junmo? In the desolate field, the blood-colored monk robe fluttered in the autumn wind. Junmo was like a graceful swan, and with the momentum of the qi of heaven and earth, he rushed to the mountain in a flash. He was still the proud Junmo. But he was just confident, and never conceited. No matter how strong the enemy was, he would not be afraid. Anyway, he would fight with his sword. But if it was necessary, he could temporarily ignore his pride. He wanted to grab the chessboard, and he had to take advantage of the time when Qi Nian and the 3 Commandment Hall elders were not in the peak. What he needed was time, and nothing else mattered. Of course, this did not mean that he would not care about the injury he got today, but he would deal with it later. In the future on the battlefield, he believed that he would meet Qi Nian and the 3 presidents of the Commandment Hall again. Anyway, they would meet again, and at that time, he would naturally fight with his sword again. This chapter is all for today, and there will be 3 chapters tomorrow. I wish everyone a good mood and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.